Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Amelia walked down the cemetery avenue and kept stopping to avoid another puddle. "Well, the water has made a mess here too," she said sadly. The woman was holding a modest bunch of carnations, the only flowers she had bought at the pavilion before she got on the bus. The rain that had been falling non-stop for days had turned the gravel on the paths into a swamp. But Amelia paid no attention to it. At the entrance to the cemetery there was a huge willow tree, whose branches stretched up to the sky as if trying to cover it. It stood like a giant guarding this sad corner of grief. Amelia quickened her step as she passed the old woman. She waved to the elderly caretaker and, without waiting for a response, walked on. Today she had a special mission, one that kept her on her toes. For about a week now, in the pocket of her purse, Amelia had been carrying a hidden camera that she was going to install on her husband Benjamin's grave. Naturally, it was a forced measure, because for the third time in a row she had seen footprints near the grave, small footprints, clearly female. "That's how you get those footprints." "It doesn't look like a big deal to me," Vivian said to her work colleague. But Amelia just shook her head. Perhaps if it hadn't been for that flood, when the river had overflowed its banks after a heavy downpour, she wouldn't have noticed anything. Fortunately, the river hadn't reached the cemetery, but the increased rainfall from the week had done its job anyway. So Amelia was very interested. And someone comes to her husband's grave, and with such enviable regularity. Who is this stranger who shows such touching devotion? The answer to this question Amelia did not yet know. The cemetery keeper, Andrew, was also unable to shed any light on the situation, as he had not seen who was visiting Benjamin's grave. It is understandable an elderly man, and the cemetery is a busy place. As she approached the mound, Amelia placed a bouquet of carnations in the vase and gently stroked the cross with her hand. Then Amelia looked around and began setting up the camera. As she did so, she couldn't help but notice a small chain of footprints in the area of the bed. Those very footprints again. But who comes here? Benjamin had always been reserved and reserved and reserved. And here he suddenly has a secret admirer. To tell the truth, Amelia didn't know why she was doing this. For a moment she had wanted to watch over her husband's grave, as if that way she could be close to him at all times. Deftly placing the camera in a hidden niche in the bed area, Amelia said goodbye to her husband and walked back. She'd only been released from the ward for half an hour as it was, and she had long since used that time throughout the workday. All Amelia could think about was the hidden camera footage. According to the salesman, the video was stored on a remote server or in the cloud, which in turn was very convenient. She purposely didn't watch the footage until the evening. It wasn't until bedtime that she finally dared to examine the day's archive. Amelia lay in bed and took the smartphone in her hands, which were trembling slightly. At first there was nothing interesting there, the usual cemetery landscapes, a realm of grief and sorrow topped with crosses of tombstones and fences. But as the timing neared evening, Amelia suddenly saw the silhouette of the man who had come to see her husband. And that's when it all became clear. In astonishment, she nearly dropped the phone from her hands. The mysterious guest who came to her husband's grave was a child. He looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. But what is he doing in a cemetery, and even on her husband's grave? Meanwhile, the boy just stood looking at the mound, as if hoping to see something special there. Then he touched the cross with his hand and walked away. Amelia's heart hammered harder. Who was the boy, and why was he coming to Benjamin? She's good too, she thought by the look of the footprints. A woman was coming there, and the mysterious visitor turned out to be a lad. So much for the mystery, Benjamin, Amelia whispered. Her husband's life had been taken by an accident on the lake where he was fishing with his business associate Andrew. Both aspiring businessmen were wearing life jackets when the boat capsized. Only Benjamin's equipment turned out to be defective and did not hold air properly. The body of the entrepreneur was found only on the 3rd day, when there was no hope for anything. Grief-stricken Amelia was literally at a loss for words. What should she do now? How to live without a loved one? With these thoughts, as if with the worst enemies, she fought day after day. But life gave her no choice. Amelia's heart clenched with a rush of pain and longing. Thoughts of Benjamin, his sweet smile, his gentle gaze tormented her soul. They had been inseparable, and their love had seemed unshakable. But now she wondered, were her feelings mutual? Before, Amelia had thought she knew her husband like the back of her hand, for he had always been a gentleman, never gave her any reason to worry about him. Amelia trusted him as herself, and even on that fateful day when her husband went fishing, she was sure that he would return. How could he not? He always did, and nothing. Fishing was his passion. I wish Benjamin were here now, Amelia thought. I wish Benjamin were here to comfort me and tell me everything would be all right. At that moment, Amelia did feel a little better. She promised herself to find this boy, no matter what it cost her. There was a reason he came with such enviable regularity. There was probably some kind of mystery behind it. What it was, Amelia couldn't figure out. But now she had proof that the footsteps at the grave were not just a dream. Amelia realized how wrong she'd been, imagining a woman with tiny feet. It was actually much simpler than that. At night, Amelia didn't sleep well. She dreamed of a hidden camera lens that for some reason was pointed at her. Waking up in a cold sweat, she got up and turned on the light. Of course, there was no camera, but her heart was pounding like crazy, trying to jump out of her chest. Meanwhile, dawn was slowly breaking on the horizon. Despite the fact that Benjamin was a businessman, there was never much money in the family. That's why Amelia didn't think it was shameful to work as a nurse in the ward for the seriously ill. It wasn't an easy job, but she didn't complain it was a contribution to the family budget, and even more so after Benjamin's death. Amelia made a quick breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table for a while and began to get ready for work. As she did so, she kept thinking of the boy who had come to the cemetery. But what could that little boy and her husband have in common? However, there was no time to think about it, since recently in the department has changed the head, who decided to roll mountains in his position. He's an inveterate careerist. He's had his share of grief, and he'll make you sweat, said her friend Vivian. But Amelia didn't pay much attention to that. Come on, it'll all work out, she thought, being an optimist by nature. That morning, however, things took a different turn. Amelia had long since become accustomed to the fact that the air in the critically ill ward was saturated with a mixture of drugs and disinfection. She walked briskly down the cool corridor, hurrying to get to the nurse's room as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Carl, the head of the ward, blocked the way. His icy, commanding gaze froze her in place. "Amelia, come here," he said in his harsh voice. "I have a report on my desk about your dereliction of duty." She flinched and her eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean, what?" Amelia asked, barely containing the tremor in her voice. "I always do my job faithfully," Amelia said. "However, I have evidence in my possession that this is not the case." Carl replied coldly. "Complaints come from both patients and staff." Amelia felt the longing and helplessness building up inside at a tremendous rate. Yes, she had given her best in nursing, and the accusations of incompetence were like a punch in the gut. How could it be? She began. But Carl didn't let her finish. "That's enough," he interrupted her in a harsh tone. "From this day on, the department is introducing a system of rewards and punishments. Employees will have the opportunity to earn points for good work and be financially rewarded for it." "But is it only about money?" Amelia argued vehemently. "We save people, we care for them. Our job is to alleviate their suffering, not to accumulate points." "Well, a hospital is also a business, and the laws of the market should apply here," replied the head of the department nonchalantly. "Besides, starting from tomorrow, the nursing staff must wear special uniforms. This is necessary to maintain discipline and order." Amelia was stunned. The system of rewards and punishments, the uniforms. Was this what she was aiming for as a nurse? She wanted to help people, not be commercialized. Strong emotions overwhelmed her, threatening to burst out. "Carl," she said in a firm voice, "I'm giving up this dodgy point scheme. I didn't come here to chase money. I came here to take care of patients." Carl's face contorted into a grimace. "You mean you're refusing?" he asked icily. "Did you know that under the terms of your employment contract you are obliged to follow the orders of the management?" Amelia sighed sadly. "Yes, I am aware of that," she replied calmly. "But I cannot go against my principles and will not participate in this humiliating scam." Carl stared at her in silence for a few seconds, his face impenetrable. Then he turned away and gave Amelia a scornful look. "Well, is that what you want?" he said. "But you'll regret it." The ward manager turned and walked away, leaving Amelia alone in the middle of the hospital corridor. Her heart was racing and her mind was spinning with thoughts. Deep down, she knew it was the right choice. She couldn't betray her patients and her ideals. But at the same time, she realized that such a choice could cost her dearly. It was said that at one time Carl had graduated from medical school with honors and was considered one of the best graduates in the history of the faculty. And it was also said that his father-in-law was the head doctor of the hospital Caleb, who had an extremely harsh temper and ruthlessly broke the careers of undesirable employees. Amelia was brought out of her sad thoughts by Vivian's voice. "Well, have you already received a beating from the bosses?" "Yes, I did," Amelia replied. "Where could I go without them? A new broom is a new broom." Vivian grinned. "It's Carl's doing his best for his father-in-law, I suppose. I'll bet he's soft and fluffy at home. He brings his wife's slippers in the morning and catches every word she says. He's got a nice daughter, Barbara. But her stepmother doesn't like her." "Stepmother?" Amelia raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Is he married a second time?" Vivienne wrinkled her nose. "Yes, Carl has a daughter from his first marriage. His wife Valerie was taken away by oncology. Then he was introduced to her by the head doctor, so to speak, to put his daughter in good hands. She doesn't need anything but restaurants and beauty salons." Amelia shook her head. Truth be told, she didn't like collecting gossip. So Amelia found it unnecessary to inquire about the details of the character of the boss's second wife. "Listen, Vivian, do you happen to know who complained about me? I think it was one of the patients, or maybe it was a colleague," she asked. Vivian's face showed genuine amazement. "Complaints? Oh, it's probably nothing. It was Carl, I think, testing you. He said if you get nervous, you've got something to worry about, right? What's going on with that camera, by the way? You know, the one you wanted to put in the cemetery? Any luck?" Amelia waved her hand. "A little bit. There was a boy on the tape. I thought it was a lover, but I didn't think it was a lover." "I'll sort it out," said Amelia. "Amelia, could it be Benjamin's son? My friend wouldn't let it go." "What do you mean, son?" "What do you mean?" "Out of wedlock, you mean?" Vivian explained. "Oh, now I don't know. It's the way it is with such rich businessmen. If their mistress isn't 30 years old, you've wasted your life, and it's even better to have two. And in different cities." Vivian answered with the look of a connoisseur. Amelia frowned. "Look, how do you know all this?" "I trust my Benjamin, for example, and I do now. I know he couldn't betray me. We'll deal with the boy." "You know best. I'm going to run or Carl will be away again with his lectures," said Vivian. "I've got to go and see David." "Okay, but the janitor has something important to talk to you about." Vivian said goodbye and disappeared into one of the wards. Amelia nodded and decided to visit the janitor at once. After all, she had already received a reprimand from Carl, so now she could do her best to earn his trust by doing something. The hot summer sun was beating down mercilessly after the recent rains, casting a golden glow on the courtyard of the hospital complex. The flood damage had already been repaired, and life was slowly returning to normal. The smell of dampness mixed with the fragrance of flowers wafting from a nearby flower seemed unbearably soulful. Suddenly, a lone silhouette caught Amelia's eye. A man in dirty work clothes sat on a bench by an overturned bin, his head slumped as if he were carrying an unbearable weight on his shoulders. "David," Amelia exclaimed, recognizing the hospital janitor. He raised his head and his eyes filled with tears. "Hello, Amelia," he said hoarsely, rising from the bench. "How are you, my dear?" I'm all right, I guess. How are yours? Amelia asked. I'm not doing well. Amelia, the janitor, lowered his head and looked at something under the bench. I'm in trouble, help me. Amelia came closer, still not understanding what had upset the elderly janitor so much. A large dog, covered in mud, was sitting in a corner, moaning softly. The pet looked sadly at Amelia. What's wrong, David? She asked anxiously. He shook his head. A patient died the other day. We worked in the same factory together for 20 years. He had a heart attack. Rex was with him. The poor guy was crying. Amelia felt a prick of pity. At that moment, she remembered that she had already seen this dog on a walk with his owner, a calm, friendly and smiling man. And now the pet was orphaned. And what to do now? She asked. Who will take him? David's eyes were filled with despair. I don't know, Amelia. There's no one left. As soon as they put his master in the coffin, he began to whimper and scratch the coffin with his paw. His eyes are sad, he cries all the time. I'd take him away, but where to? We are living in a one-room flat with my wife, and my grandson is visiting for the summer. Amelia looked at the dog with pity. The dog, sensing her gaze, stood up, pressed his ears to his head, and stretched out his muzzle to her. His eyes expressed pain, despair, and grief for his departed master. David, shall I have him for myself? Amelia exclaimed happily. Amelia, exclaimed the janitor. You're a real angel, thank you very much. Amelia stroked the dog's head and he whimpered as if thanking her. I've never owned a dog before, Amelia said, embarrassed. I don't even know what it's like. Don't worry, Amelia. Rex is a quiet dog. He won't make any noise. And he likes to go for walks, said the janitor. Well, you go on, sweetheart, or the boss will scold you. You'll come round after work, won't you? Sure, David. Just find him a leash. Okay, said the janitor. Okay, we'll do that. Amelia went to work. But in her mind was Rex. She imagined his pain, his loneliness, and the tender devotion with which the dog looked at his dead master. At the end of her shift, tired as usual after work, she eagerly went to see David. As it turned out, the dog had been eagerly awaiting her arrival. Amelia squatted down in front of the dog. Rex slowly raised his head and sighed heavily, as if he was intertwined with sadness and hoped that he would soon find his owner again, and then licked her hand, softly and gently. Amelia smiled. Rex, she said softly, stroking his back. You know, it's sad for you, but you're not alone. Now you're going to live with me. The janitor stood by and watched silently. His eyes were filled with gratitude for what Amelia had done. After saying goodbye to David, she took the leash in her hand and led her new friend towards the exit of the hospital yard. At that moment, her phone in her purse alerted her mistress to a notification. Amelia flinched, then realized with distinct clarity. Thus, the electronic assistant of covert surveillance was signaling to her that something interesting had come into the camera lens. Amelia opened the program and froze with amazement. The thing was that the same boy she had seen before was on the tape again. And the most interesting thing was that the recording was in real time. That is, he was still at Benjamin's grave. Amelia thought for a moment, then looked anxiously at the face of her wristwatch. What if we go to the cemetery right now, talk to the boy, and find out what's what? Especially since it's not far from here, she thought. Yeah, let's go for a walk, Amelia whispered, taking Rex's leash. The evening sun was setting behind the horizon, coloring the sky with violet and scarlet tones. A cool breeze whispered that night was coming soon. Rex fidgeted, his ears perked up as if he sensed something wrong. They walked along the narrow path that led to the farthest corner of the cemetery, where Benjamin was buried. It had been a long time, more than 6 months, but Amelia still couldn't come to terms with her husband's passing. Every week she went to the grave to talk, to share her worries. It was as if Benjamin could hear her through the prism of time and the thickness of the mound. The cemetery was met with a cold silence, broken only by the faint rustling of tree branches, coupled with the sound of heels cutting through the heavy atmosphere of mournful oblivion. Amelia saw in the distance, some distance away, leaning on an old, time-damaged wooden bench, a small boy. He was dressed in dark, shabby clothes, too big for his skinny body. On his head was an old cap with patch marks, and his dark hair stuck out unruly in all directions. His brown eyes were bright and lively, like two sparks, looking at the bunch of wildflowers laid on the grave. When he felt someone's gaze on him, the boy raised his head. When he saw Amelia, he hesitated, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Who are you, little boy?" she asked cautiously, still not sure what was going on. "I'm James," he whispered, shaking with fear. "I've come to see Daddy, to see Daddy." James, Amelia repeated, as if in a dream, "To see who, Papa?" "Uncle Benjamin," said the boy, pointing to the oak cross. "That's my Papa." At that moment, the world seemed to stop for Amelia. The wind stopped rustling the leaves and the birds were silent. It was as if someone had switched off the sound. "You're wrong," Amelia whispered, speechless for a moment. "It's my husband. He died 6 months ago." I know, the boy lowered his eyes. "But that's my daddy." Rex whimpered softly, as if sensing the change that was coming, and huddled against Amelia's legs. Truth be told, she really didn't know what to do next. But what else could she say? How could she explain to this kid that Benjamin was gone forever, and life had split in two? "How do you know Benjamin?" Amelia asked in a shaky voice, and took a step towards the boy. "He used to work in the office," James said, looking at the ground. "I used to come to see him. We used to play checkers with Uncle Benjamin. He used to give me candy. He also promised to buy me a new robot. We even wanted to go to the zoo." "And your mum?" Amelia whispered, unable to hold back her tears. The boy sighed sadly. "Mum died a long time ago." He paused and lowered his head even lower, as if from the weight of forgotten words. "Uncle Benjamin said he would be my daddy now." At that moment, Amelia felt extremely dizzy and almost lost her senses. To tell the truth, she didn't understand how this was possible. How could she have lived with this mystery all these years without realizing the existence of this boy who had become a rival in love to Benjamin? "How did you know he was dead?" Amelia asked, struggling to keep the confusing thoughts in her head. "They told me when I came to the office," the boy replied. He looked at Amelia through his tears. The little boy's eyes seemed wan and empty, as if they still reflected all those unspoken words of love and sorrow from life that remained in his soul. Amelia stood there, not knowing what to do. It seemed that the boy was a street child and lived wherever he could, and in her soul there was a storm of incomprehensible feelings, where compassion for this lonely boy and anger at her husband for hiding the child's existence from her were mixed. Added to all this was a heavy sense of irrevocable loss, she said. Quietly, she brought her hand to her face to wipe away the tears she could no longer hold back. "I will take you to my house. You can call me Aunt Amelia." She gently stroked James's head, feeling the simple gesture make him feel a little better. In that moment, she knew that the boy was innocent and had nothing to do with the heartbreaking secret between her and Benjamin. James nodded in agreement and took her hand. They walked together until they left the cemetery, surrounded by a ringing silence that not even the ubiquitous sparrows disturbed. Rex followed closely behind them, doing just fine without a leash. Amelia squeezed James's hand, and he squeezed it back, as if to say that they weren't alone. Frankly, Amelia didn't know how she was going to live her life, but at the same time she realized that if Benjamin really was the father of this baby, she would accept him as her own in memory of her husband. All the more so because she herself could not have children. She had been unsuccessfully treated in different clinics for a long time. Rex liked James at once. All the way to the cemetery gate, the dog was licking the boy's hand, trying to touch his cheek with his nose. As they passed a mournful row of freshly dug graves, Rex stopped suddenly and whined softly, trying to get closer. Amelia found clods of fresh earth sprinkled on one of the graves, came closer and saw that the dog had already started digging the loose soil with his paws. "Rex, what are you doing?" she asked, concerned. The dog only dug himself deeper into the ground as he continued to whimper. Amelia felt goosebumps run down her spine. She realized that Rex must be feeling something special, something that made him feel very bad. Squatting down beside him, she gently placed her hands on his trembling body. "Who is buried here?" she asked in a whisper. It seemed as if the dog understood every word she said. He whimpered even more, desperately poking his muzzle at the cross. Amelia, overcoming her fear, approached and read the engraved name on the plaque. At that moment, her chest pressed as if someone had squeezed it with an iron hand. In front of her was the grave of the dog's former owner, who had passed away a few days ago. "Oh, Rex," she whispered and leaned against the grave. "You found him at that moment after all." Time and space merged together. Grief, tenderness, and care overflowed Amelia's heart. Rex immediately fell silent, as if realizing that his master was gone. How sad, she sighed. She took a memorial candle from her bag, lit it, and placed it on the edge of the grave. The warm light of the flame illuminated the name on the plaque, creating the illusion of presence. Rex stopped whimpering and got to his feet, signaling that they needed to go home. Little James watched with wide-open eyes, for this was the first time he had ever seen such a thing. They arrived at the house after dark, as this was the first time James and Rex had been here. They froze in the hallway, not knowing where to go next. "Well, have you been thinking, mates? Come in. Don't be afraid, I'll feed you. The bathroom is straight ahead, and to the left," Amelia said with a smile. "Thank you. I like a bath with hot water and bubble bath," James said. The boy's words made Amelia's heart warm. It's a good thing Benjamin decided to have a baby. And even if he wasn't born in marriage to her, it's still nice. It's a piece of his soul, flesh and flesh, she thought. Amelia didn't know for sure that James was Benjamin's own son. But if the little boy calls him daddy, then that's the way it is. Heating up the remains of last night's dinner on the cooker, she sat James at the table and gave Rex his food in a separate bowl placed on the floor. The boy and the dog ate greedily, indicating that they were both systematically undernourished and fed on whatever God sent them. But Amelia didn't have time to start eating, because at that very moment her mobile phone rang. She shuddered and looked at the smartphone screen in surprise. When she saw the name of the caller, she was visibly embarrassed. The intruder of their evening peace was Andrew's husband's ex-companion, whose business had improved considerably since Benjamin's death. He'd been calling her for days. She kept putting it off. To tell the truth, she did not want to hear about Benjamin, to remember his business, and most importantly about the gentleman's agreement that Andrew had made with her husband. As it turned out, Benjamin had bequeathed his business to his partner shortly before his death on the lake in exchange for a promise to transfer a certain amount of money to Amelia every month, but she didn't need the money. She didn't care about the fate of Benjamin's business. As sacrilegious as it sounded, without her husband, the very notion of business was nothing to Amelia. She sighed sadly and answered the phone. "Andrew, is that you?" "Hello," she said in a steady voice. "Amelia, hello, how are you, darling, how are you?" It's been a while. Andrew's voice sounded affectionate and almost friendly. "Thank you." "I'm fine," Amelia replied, trying to keep her voice unemotional. "I want to come to you with a present," Andrew continued. "I've got some money saved up for you. Anyway, I want to bring you the monthly installment." "Andrew, don't," Amelia replied. "I don't want to take it." "Don't refuse the money." "Well, what are you?" Andrew persuaded her. "I promised Benjamin that I would support you. It was his last will and testament." "Please don't." Andrew, Amelia could barely hold back her tears. "I don't want that money. You've earned this business. Benjamin bequeathed it to you, and you have to move on with it and grow the business together." "Amelia, you know I'd give you the business and all the money," Andrew blurted out. "But it was important to Benjamin that you stay safe. And he was sure I could provide you with a comfortable, quiet life." "Thank you, Andrew," she said gratefully. "But you have to understand, I've never needed anything. I have a job. I'm an orderly in a hospital, but I have enough money, and I want you to use that money as needed. Give it to, I don't know, an orphanage, a center for people with disabilities." "Oh, you're kind, Amelia." Andrew smiled. "All right, I'll gladly use the money as you say. But don't think that the management of these organizations will use it for a good cause. They'll probably take a good chunk of it for themselves. Maybe not even a good piece." Amelia remained silent, thinking of her own. Deep down, she knew Andrew would lie if he had to, but at the same time her feminine instincts told her otherwise. Andrew, Amelia began. I just want to ask you for one little favor. Please talk. Did Benjamin have children with another woman outside of his marriage? Andrew fell silent. You know I don't have any information on the subject. Benjamin had no secret life. Andrew, are you sure? She asked. I'm telling you again, Amelia, I don't have any information on the subject. Or maybe you just don't want to tell. She asked and squeezed her hands even tighter. You don't understand me. I don't know anything about it, of course, but you can rest easy. Benjamin had no one but you, said Andrew. It can't be, Amelia thought, but her heart didn't want to believe those words. It was so important to Benjamin that Amelia was safe, and he could be sure of Andrew. But maybe Andrew didn't know her husband as well as he thought he did. Thank you, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm happy for you. Benjamin's business is in good hands now. Thank you, Andrew replied and hung up. Amelia sat and thought, remembering how they had met Benjamin and Andrew. It had been a long time ago, in their third year of university. Benjamin had always been into cinema and Andrew into photography. Usually after going to the cinema, the friends would go to a cafe to have a coffee and discuss their creative plans. Amelia was working in the library at the time and accidentally saw them in one institution. She was fascinated by Benjamin's charisma and his obsession with the world of cinema. It was that day that she fell in love. Since then, Amelia and Benjamin practically never parted, and a couple of years later they played a wedding. Andrew was at the wedding as a witness, and later became a business companion of her husband. At the same time, everyone knew that Benjamin was the brain center of the company. But Andrew did not grab stars from the sky, because he graduated from university and became an economist only thanks to his mate. Among students, Benjamin was called a phenomenon for his ability to add and multiply huge numbers in his head. But in life he was not lucky. He died as a result of an accident, having given the reins to his companion shortly before. Entering the kitchen with a tinge of sadness on her face, Amelia asked, Listen, James, do you happen to know an Uncle Andrew? You know, the one who cooperated with your dad? The boy shuddered and dropped the spoon from his hands. In turn, immediately perked up his ears and said, Uncle Andrew, why I don't know. I do, James replied. It was he who brought me to Uncle Benjamin and told him I was his son. And before that he took me to the hospital for some reason. They took blood from me. James' answer shocked Amelia to the core. What's that supposed to mean? Andrew was blatantly lying. Or maybe he was just following the instructions left to him by the late Benjamin. Only two men could know the truth. And one of them was now resting in the city cemetery. And the other was heading his company, becoming the head of a very promising businessman. Deciding not to tell Andrew about her discoveries and suspicions, Amelia returned to the table to chat with James about this and that. The boy was visibly revitalized and feeling much better than he had when he'd first stepped through the door. As it turned out, because of James's stories, Uncle Andrew had seen him at the supermarket, where he wanted to steal something and eat it again. And not even for himself, but for his grandfather, who was ill and could not get out of bed. The boy's mother died in childbirth. There was no one to look after the baby. Andrew stood up for James when a security guard caught him on the way out with a stolen bun worth a penny. The businessman paid not only for the stolen goods themselves, but also compensated for the damage to the shop. However, there was no damage as such. Why did the amount of money smoothly move into the pockets of the cashier and the security guard? Taking James by the hand, Andrew walked him home, but when the boy opened the door, he saw his grandfather lying in the corridor, showing no signs of life. A second heart attack for Mr. Leonard proved fatal, and the elderly man was unable to survive it. To Andrew's credit, he took over the funeral arrangements for James's grandfather, and then began to care for the boy, preparing him to meet his birth father Benjamin. As Amelia listened to the boy's confused story, she could not hold back her tears. How much grief and misery this little boy, who looked like a hunted wolf cub, had to endure. Just how was her husband related to his mom? James's last name was Green, but that alone didn't mean anything to Amelia. She didn't know any women with that surname, and James himself had never seen his mom in any way, not even in a photograph. Amelia hugged the baby and kissed him on the top of his head, promising to take care of him and help him with everything. She was also relieved to know that James was very independent and could be left home alone, or rather, not quite alone, but with Rex, who would be better than any nanny. And James was bright beyond his years, and understandably so. Deprived of his parents' support, he learnt the secrets of life under the guidance of his grandfather, who had his own view of the world. Having chosen the room as a nursery, Amelia made the guest bed and filled the bathtub with bubble bath. James' joy knew no bounds. He laughed contagiously as he blew bubbles and cheered every time Rex caught one of the balloons, as if they were circus balls. Furtively watching the baby, Amelia felt incomparable relief. Of course, she realized that Benjamin had cheated on her, but on the other hand, he had redeemed himself by leaving a memory of himself in the form of a beautiful little man, who always wanted to cheer her up. Rex, too, was willing to sleep in James's room, not in bed, of course, but next to him on the mat, like a mute guardian whose shaggy ears were always on the lookout for his little master. The next morning, Amelia woke early and set about preparing breakfast and lunch for James and Rex. The little one couldn't stay hungry until the evening. Amelia had made provision for that. Leaving a note on the table, specially written in block letters, she quietly closed the door behind her, so as not to disturb his sweet morning sleep. On her way to work, Amelia thought of the new superintendent, Carl, again. Is he still going to bend his line today and insist on the reward point system? What nonsense is this, really? In the morning peak light, with the sun barely breaking through the roofs of the city's buildings, Amelia hurried to the hospital, making every minute count. She tried to keep up with her schedule, realizing that being late could have serious consequences for her. Suddenly, behind her, Amelia heard a child's shrill cry. When she turned round, she saw a girl flying on a bicycle straight into the carriageway. At that moment, it was as if time had slowed down for her. When Amelia realized the imminent danger, she did not hesitate for a second and rushed towards the little girl. At the same time, there was the screech of brakes and the screams of bystanders. With an incredible twist, Amelia managed to pick up the baby and pull her to safety. A second later, the SUV drove over the bike with a sickening crunch, and the road was immediately strewn with small splinters. The girl's frightened face said she couldn't believe she had miraculously escaped the tragedy. The first thing Amelia did was to calm the child. Gently hugging and cradling her, the little girl trembled. But thankfully, she had no visible injuries. Still choking with sobs, she continued to whisper words of gratitude in the ear of her savior. At that moment, the girl's worried elderly nanny, who had just learnt about the incident, came to them. "Oh my God, thank you so much," she exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "You saved my little princess." Amelia only shrugged her shoulders modestly, signaling that she was glad to have helped. Secretly, she was still proud of herself for not being confused in a critical situation. It was now that she realized the true meaning of her job, not only to save lives within the walls of the hospital, but to be ready to help at any moment. However, the joy of saving lives was overshadowed by the fact that now Amelia was bound to be late for work and would get another reprimand from the head of the hospital. After saying goodbye to the girl and her nanny, Amelia hurried to work. As she approached the hospital, her growing anxiety only increased. She knew she was going to get in trouble from her superiors, especially from Carl, who was strictly following instructions. Imagining his stern look and reproachful tone, Amelia mentally prepared herself for what she would have to say in response. The mood had gone completely sour. After all, only half an hour ago everything had been so good, and now a difficult and unpleasant conversation awaited. And maybe I should give up everything, quit after weighing up the pros and cons. Amelia realized that quitting her job in this situation would be very foolish, especially as she now had a new addition to her family in the form of little James. As soon as she crossed the threshold of the ward for the critically ill, Amelia was practically nose to nose with Carl, who, as usual, looked angry and bossy. "Amelia, where have you been, may I ask?" he began somewhat abruptly and rudely. She lowered her eyes to the floor, her cheeks flaming, her hands nervously clutching the edge of her purse. Amelia drew in a chestful of air to explain herself, but the words were suddenly stuck in her throat. "What's the matter? Have you lost your tongue?" "I want an explanation, not silence," the superintendent exclaimed impatiently. She flapped her eyelashes in despair and rubbed her hands together nervously. "I'm sorry, Carl. I was late for work because her voice trembled. She couldn't hold back her tears. Carl was surprised. He was used to tears and excuses. Amelia had always had a calm and responsible nature, and her current behavior was confusing. "Wait, breathe," he said more gently. "Calm down and explain what happened." Amelia took a deep breath and told him what had really happened. Carl listened silently, and his stern face gradually softened. "And why were you late for work after that?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes, Carl, that's right," Amelia replied, still worried. "I had to stay with the baby for a while to make sure she was all right." The doctor suddenly walked over to the nurse and took her hand. "Amelia, I'm very grateful to you for saving this little girl. This is my daughter Barbara, okay? She rang me 5 minutes ago and told me she'd nearly been hit by a car on the road. But some brave stranger saved her. I had no idea it was you." Amelia looked away in embarrassment. "You're welcome. I just did what I had to do," she replied. "No, it's really worth a thank you," the superintendent objected. "You saved my daughter's life, and I want to thank you for that. And don't argue with me. I know better what is best for a nurse, and what is not," said Carl. "You did a heroic deed, Amelia. I will not forget it." He thought for a few moments and then continued. "As of today, you are appointed head nurse in this hospital block. I will personally see to it that you have a more flexible work schedule so that you can take time for your own affairs." Amelia was touched and grateful. With tears in her eyes, she promised Carl that she would faithfully fulfill her duties. Of course, it was easy for her colleagues to guess that she was now under the special patronage of the head of the department. Some even envied her, but at the same time realized that she deserved it. Amelia continued to work hard, devoting herself to her job and helping the patients. "Good morning, Amelia." Mrs. Gwen, the head nurse, greeted her cheerfully. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" "Fine," she replied. "I feel great." "That's good to hear. You deserve a rest after having to prove yourself a hero." The nurse's last words caught the attention of her colleagues, and they quickly surrounded Amelia, showering her with compliments. "Yes, Amelia, you've become quite the hero," said Mrs. Juliet, an elderly nurse. "I heard you saved Carl's daughter," said Linda, a younger nurse. "He must have carried you in his arms." Amelia smiled embarrassedly. "No, not at all. I just did what anyone would have done in my place." "But not everyone would have been as brave and selfless as you were," Mrs. Juliet said. "You risked your life, didn't you?" "Yes, everyone was shocked when they saw you jump out into the road and push the girl away," Nurse Ben added, "and then you came back to the ward as if nothing had happened." Amelia looked away modestly. Just noticed the little girl was in danger. Couldn't stay away. But not everyone shared her admiration. The nurse Vivian was watching, her face a mixture of envy and gloating. "Look who's the heroine of the day," she hissed through gritted teeth. "All she knows how to do is fidget in front of Carl, and begging for favors," Vivian hissed. Unfortunately, Amelia heard her words. She turned round and met Vivian's gaze. "What are you talking about?" Amelia asked, a look of surprise on the young nurse's face. "What else?" Vivian smirked. "About your supposedly heroic rescue mission. You know Carl's wife has filed for divorce. Are you trying to brighten his loneliness, or are you trying to get his daughter's attention?" What Amelia whispered in amazement. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, you don't?" Vivian interjected mockingly. "I noticed the way you were looking at Carl. Your eyes were glistening. Your life-saving feat was just a way to get his attention." "That's not true." Amelia was outraged. "I helped the girl because it was my duty. I didn't know who she was at all." Of course, Vivian said ironically. "Don't believe it. Everyone knows that the main reason for your actions a cunning, deliberate calculation. And you've made no secret of the fact that you're in love with the head of the eyes. But you miscalculated. After the divorce, Mr. Leonard will remove his ex-son-in-law from this sweet position and send him to some backwater. You weren't born in December, were you?" Amelia opened her mouth in shock. She couldn't believe that her former best friend was accusing her of such unseemly things. "What are you talking about, Vivian?" she exclaimed. "Quiet, don't shout. Everyone will hear your secret," Vivian threatened. "I'm serious, Amelia. If you keep running after Carl, I'm going to tell Mr. Leonard, and I don't think he'll like you using your job to solve your own problems." With those words, Vivian turned and walked away, leaving Amelia standing alone in shock. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clasped her hands to her chest, feeling her heart being torn apart. How could she think that, Amelia asked herself, do her colleagues really think so badly of her? The nurse recalled how from the moment she arrived on the ward, everyone had praised her as hard-working, compassionate, strong, humble. But, as it turned out, envy and self-interest lurked behind these words. Amelia felt her life crumbling before her eyes. She could no longer imagine working side by side with people who thought so badly of her, and how she would look Carl in the eye, knowing that her act could be interpreted as an attempt to get his attention. Fortunately, Amelia was unaware that the ward manager had heard her conversation with Vivienne from beginning to end. Having had his moment, Carl led the older nurse into his office and closed the door. "I have something to tell you, Amelia," he said. "The fact is that it was Vivian who wrote that denunciation against you, that complaint, and it was because of her that I had to give you a preventive talk yesterday morning. It's true, Vivian wrote an anonymous letter, but I've compared the handwriting sample from the note with the handwriting samples on file, so there can be no doubt. It was Vivian who complained about you." Amelia shook her head contritely and thanked her boss for the warning. Seeing the frozen sadness in her eyes, he asked, "Tell me, is there anything else I can help you with? If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." At first, Amelia shook her head negatively, but then suddenly she remembered the DNA test Andrew had done in their clinic. "If you, Carl, could pull up the archives and find out what the results were, it would help solve a lot of problems," she said, gathering her breath. Amelia told the superintendent everything that had happened to her over the past few months. She told him about her late husband Andrew's partner, about the hidden camera in the cemetery, about the intimate photos. Carl listened to her in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. Finally, when Amelia finished her story, Carl furrowed his brow and said, "I think I can help you. You'll have to wait a day or two, but there's no other way." Tears glistened in Amelia's eyes. "Thank you so much, Carl," she said. The superintendent just waved his hand. "It's all right. Go, Amelia. I dare not keep you any longer." Throughout the day, the new head nurse had been wondering what the ward manager would find out about Vivian. She simply stopped talking to her, realizing her true rotten nature. To Amelia's surprise, Carl approached her again during the lunch break and, taking her aside, said quietly, "I have inquired about the results of the comparative DNA test conducted with sample number 1, which belonged to your late husband Benjamin, and sample number 2, which is directly related to James Green." At this point, the superintendent suddenly stopped talking and squinted at Amelia. What did the test reveal? She couldn't stand it. Carl shook his head and then gave her a startling answer. Benjamin and James are completely devoid of any family connection. Accordingly, under no circumstances can they be father and son. Moreover, the man who provided these samples, Andrew Smith, offered the genetics expert a substantial bribe to officially establish paternity between Benjamin and James. But the expert did not take the money, and also wrote a report on him. We have a copy, by the way. I think now would be a good time to go to the police. A tear rolled down Amelia's cheek, and her lips trembled. Oh my God, what was this? Andrew had deliberately deceived Benjamin, pretending to be his illegitimate son, she said, unable to find an answer to the question. Amelia did not resist and went to the police. At first, the operatives expressed doubts that there was a criminal element to the case. But when Andrew was called in for questioning, he broke down and grabbed a pen and started writing a confession. Andrew was so tired of waiting to be arrested. He was as happy to see the police as a sick person is happy to see the ambulance staff arriving on time. As it turns out, it was all greed. Envious of his more fortunate companion, Andrew decided to nail him. To do this, he used an old story when 7 years ago Benjamin had too much alcohol and found himself in the arms of his secretary Helen. True, nothing really happened. Benjamin simply fell asleep in his chair. But Andrew presented it as adultery, thus obtaining reliable dirt against his companion. Time passed, and there was no opportunity to use it. It is worth saying that after the incident at the corporate party, Helen's secretary resigned to avoid rumors, but Andrew still used her name for his own purposes. After the woman died in the accident, the cunning companion presented everything in a completely different light, making Benjamin believe that his former secretary died of massive hemorrhage during a difficult delivery. The businessman quickly put 2 plus 2 together and came up with a timeline. The realization of the gruesome truth, invented by Andrew, overwhelmed Benjamin, depriving him of peace for a long time. At the same time, the businessman was very afraid that Amelia would find out about the alleged affair and his illegitimate son. For this very reason, Benjamin succumbed to Andrew's blackmail to rewrite the company in his name with the preservation of a monthly allowance for Amelia. And then everything was a matter of technique, cleverly organizing an assassination attempt on Benjamin and making it look like an accident at the lake. Andrew became the sole owner of the entire business. Although Benjamin himself was also to blame if he had told Amelia about everything would have fallen into place. But the businessman simply did not have time to do so, all the while thinking about what he would say to his wife when she looked into his eyes and learnt about Andrew's monstrous deception. Amelia could not hold back her tears. After all, in essence, Benjamin was not guilty of anything. Moreover, he had nothing to do with the birth of little James. What was there to do now? Should I tell James that he was no longer her son? Or tell him that Uncle Andrew had made an unfortunate mistake? Naturally, Amelia didn't. What's more, having secured Carl's support, she filed the paperwork to formalize James as her son. Given her excellent work record, a favorable decision from the Board of Guardians was not long in coming. About the same time, Andrew appeared in court, where he got the full program. Amelia, of course, did not feel sorry for him, especially considering how much grief and trouble he had caused her family. Only for one thing she could thank him: for little James, who by blind chance ended up in the walls of her house. But Carl, after the divorce from his daughter, a high-ranking doctor, was not fired. On the contrary, he went on promotion, displacing in the chair of his former father-in-law. Orderly Vivian suffered the fate of all schemers who dream of achieving success at the expense of others. At one point, Vivian was simply sacked. The reason was more than weighty and justified negligent attitude to patients and theft of medicines. At first, Amelia didn't believe it. But when in her presence from her purse Vivian pulled out the cherished package of scarce medicine, everything fell into place. Only in one thing Vivian was not mistaken. After the incident with the rescue of little Barbara, the fates of Amelia and Carl merged together by the very thread that is called mutual love and feelings. Ironically, the wedding of Carl and Amelia coincided with the rejection of the appeal of Andrew, who was waiting for a solid sentence in one of the northern colonies of the country. But James and Barbara knew nothing of this at all. They were busy preparing for their parents' wedding and entertaining the guests. Noticing that a millionaire was throwing away a cupboard, the tramp decided to take it for himself, but looking inside MP4. It is now an unremarkable man living in an old, abandoned and dilapidated house, known in several neighboring villages as Matt. But once he was known by a different name, Mr. Matthew. He was referred to by grateful patients and respected physician colleagues. A rehabilitation physician, Matthew taught at the local university and had an extensive medical practice. People traveled to him from neighboring areas, as he had a reputation as a specialist who could get almost anyone doomed to a wheelchair back on their feet. But at one point, life took a wrong turn. His beloved wife, as in a bad anecdote, was caught cheating with a friend who was a supervisor in the very hospital where Matthew worked, the head of the department. As a result of the scandal with his once beloved wife, the man found himself on the street, as the flat was inherited by his ex-wife from her parents. From the hospital, he was survived by a former friend who now lived in a 4-room flat in the center, where Matthew and his wife used to live. All this broke the wounded and sensitive doctor, who lived with the certainty that if you live according to conscience, then fate will never turn to your unsavory side. Alcohol, detachment from life, and endless self-pity led him to an old house on the outskirts of the settlement, where he lived alone, not letting anyone from the city, where nothing else held him. He had gone to the region. As there in the village, it was possible to rent a small ramshackle house for a pittance. The proximity to nature and the absence of the noise of the crowd enticed him to choose his place of residence. He wanted to escape from everything from his past life, from acquaintances who were in it, even from himself. Alcohol entered his life tightly. Every day started with a glass of low-quality hot drink. At the beginning of his new life, he had money the remnants of his former wealth, but soon his reserves began to run out. He moved out of his rented house to a long abandoned house on the outskirts. The locals said that a lonely old woman had lived there, and after her death the house was untouchable and stood boarded up. Of course, it was frequented by local boys looking for privacy and drunks looking for profit, but Mr. Matthew was able to keep it relatively tidy and fix what was broken. Fortunately, his hands were golden, though that talent had now dissolved into the addiction he had brought himself into. He supported his modest existence with occasional earnings from the locals, some to dig a vegetable garden, some to chop wood, and some to clean animal cages. At night, ashamed of himself, he would sneak through the woods to the rubbish dump adjacent to the expensive village where the cottages of the local elite of the city and region stood. Mr. Matthew lived on the outskirts of the settlement, through the woods, a kilometer and a half away from which was the local Rublevka. There was always something to be had in the rubbish dumps of this gated community, so Matthew was a frequent visitor there. When he saw the local oligarch throwing out a cupboard, Matthew was surprised, since when did the owners themselves, not the servants, take out the rubbish? And it was a good cabinet. Curiosity, natural wit, and instincts told him to keep his head down, not to reveal himself, but to wait until Mr. Stone left in his car. As soon as the car rounded the corner, Matthew ran out of his hiding place and ran to the cupboard. At first he thought he heard a groan, but when he opened the door, there was no longer any doubt a young woman was lying in the cupboard, wounded and tormented. The moan was faint and was not repeated. But at first it seemed to the doctor that it was her last dying breath. As was his habit, he began to feel for a pulse. It was hard to feel, but there was one. The woman was close to death. She needed urgent medical attention. Her entire body was mutilated and she was barely breathing. Clearly she had been dumped for a reason, and clearly with no hope of anyone finding her while she was still alive. And Mr. Stone may simply not have realized that the woman was not yet dead and was desperately clinging to her last hope of life. Pictures of possible scenarios flashed rapidly through the man's mind. One thing remained constant: the oath he had taken, the doctor's oath. He could not leave this woman on a cold October evening here in this condition. Mr. Matthew knew perfectly well the routine of local life. No one was ever here on a Saturday night, and on Sunday mornings there was no cleaning, which meant no rubbish was thrown away. If he left it as it was, the woman's cold corpse would be discovered Monday afternoon, at the earliest. He wouldn't dare call for help either. And it's not even about the lack of money on his mobile phone, because he had been drinking heavily, and once again, as had happened many times before, forgot to pay for the connection to call an ambulance or the police, but because to do so would be tantamount to signing the woman's death warrant. As soon as it turns out who threw out the cupboard with the surprise, then immediately the servants will run to inform the owner about what happened, and the woman will have no chance at all. There was no hope of a decent doctor or policeman. I would have to become a good Samaritan myself. Taking a breath and trying to calm himself down, Mr. Matthew pulled himself together and went to fetch his trolley, which he usually used to carry his finds. Today he would obviously be taking home something very different from what he had hoped for. Carefully, with all due caution, he began to move the body onto the trolley, but the woman still reacted instantly. Apparently the wounds were serious, and every touch caused pain throughout her body. The journey to the place Mr. Matthew was now forced to consider home was already a long one for an elderly man, and considering the weight of the burden, the journey took about 3 hours. As best he could, he wrapped the woman up to keep her warm from the cold, for he found her in a tank top and tights, if it could be called that. After what had happened to her, the clothes hadn't kept their original appearance either. All the way Mr. Matthew gingerly eyed his new problem, heard her moans, and pondered what had happened. He thought the woman looked familiar to him, though anything was possible in this darkness, and given how much his new patient's face had been altered by the efforts of some sadist. Though there was little doubt that the name of the sadist was Mr. Stone, Finally reaching his lodgings, the doctor was able to exhale a little. It was unlikely that even if his ward was searched for, she would be found here. Now it remained to carefully examine the wounds and injuries, to assess what he could do at home, which was far from sterile, and what he would need to do it. The second issue was, of course, the acquisition of the drugs, materials, and devices he needed to help him. He had a small amount of money stashed away, but immediately the realization turned on that there was no way he could purchase at once, and in one place close to here. It's clear Mr. Stone wanted to get rid of the body. Either he figured the woman was already dead, or he didn't want to mess around and dumped her in sub-zero temperatures, and was sure that with her injuries she wouldn't survive the night. Either way, he would await news of the discovery of the corpse, and when that didn't happen, would seek information. And it was absolutely impossible to draw attention to himself. It was surprising that such an unusual, dangerous, and extraordinary case had, for the first time in years, stifled the urge to drink and feel sorry for himself. He only felt sorry for this young woman now, and he wanted to do everything he could to help her. Taking a closer look at her, he found nothing unusual during his examination. A woman of about 35, slim, even athletic, but all in all, nothing special. Mr. Matthew, like everyone else in the area, knew by sight the man who had dumped the cupboard, and he knew he didn't frequent the neighboring upscale community. Yes, he had bought himself the coolest plot of land with a huge modern cottage and access to the river. But as far as everyone knew, he was a rare guest in his house, and when he visited, he came with girls of a completely different type, young and beautiful. Not a single operation of cosmetological procedures, dressed in fashionable clothes, or rather even undressed according to the latest fashion. How accurate the rumors were, our Mr. Matthew didn't know, but it was said that the girls never repeated themselves. Mr. Stone always arrived with a new one. All in all, the situation seemed as strange and implausible as possible. But since he had taken the responsibility and the courage, there was nothing else to do. It was necessary to act. After some thought, Mr. Matthew made a list of all the essentials and thought about where to buy them without attracting attention. The first buses would be leaving soon, and it would be necessary to be among the first passengers so that he could go round all the points he had planned and buy everything he needed. He had already done what he could without the auxiliary materials. He has cut and carefully stripped the wretched woman of the remnants of her clothing, examined all her wounds. But it's clear that antibiotics, IVs, and cervical kits are needed here for even minimal care. And that's still with the hope that all he saw was a single injury, and there were no internal ones he couldn't help with under any circumstances. For now, all he could do was wash the wounds, treat them with vodka, something, and there was plenty of that goodness. For the rest, he would have to go as soon as possible. With one last look at the source of his new problems, he left the house. He wasn't able to return until the evening. I really hope my help is still relevant and the woman is alive, thought Mr. Matthew Pattison, although he did not find any swelling typical of internal injuries. But it was impossible to rule out that possibility. Plus, he didn't know that the victim might have been injected with something that would guarantee death before being thrown away. It was with a heavy heart that he walked from the bus stop to his house with a rucksack of everything he needed. Spent the last of his money on it. The last cord went to the shop and bought a basic set of groceries to feed his new patient. Of course, she won't be able to eat right away and won't be on nutrition, IVs and all the necessary things he took. But chicken broth is also a thing indispensable for those who need to recuperate. As soon as she starts to regain consciousness, it will be necessary to take care of her. Fortunately, Vasily Nikiforovich found the woman alive. The sheet he had covered her with was all bunched up. Sweat was beading on her forehead, clearly fever from the infection. Having quickly laid out everything necessary, the doctor began manipulations that could save her life. 2 weeks passed in care and aspirations for the patient. He did not drink a drop of alcohol. During this time he slept intermittently. As the woman had one crisis followed by another, he was afraid to leave her side. The situation stabilized only on the 16th day. During all this time he did not hear a single word from his ward. Only moans and quiet mumbling and delirium during the first nights when the situation was at its most critical. The patient opened her eyes, suddenly, and staring at the back of the man who had saved her with horror. The doctor turned round at the feeling of someone looking intently at him, and almost jumped, startled by the fear in her eyes. "Hush. I didn't hurt you. I am helping you. Don't worry," he spoke, panting. Vasily Nikiforovich saw many different patients who were unlucky in life, and who were brought to his office by the curves of their fate. They were both victims of car accidents and victims of crime, but he could not remember such eyes. He physically felt pain from that look, as if the whole world had been destroyed in front of his patient's eyes, and that pain was bursting out through the look. From then on, they existed in silence. The patient did not speak at all. The doctor tried to talk to her, but it was all in vain, and he stopped. He did everything he could to make her well enough to get back on her feet. Compresses, drips, gymnastics, exercises, nutrition. He gave her everything, devoted himself to her life, found a new meaning to his existence. He thanked himself for the fact that, despite his pernicious addiction to alcohol, he was able to keep in himself the habit of thrift and had some savings for a rainy day. He also did not drink the only valuable thing. He still owned an ancient cross with a chain, which he had inherited from his mother. He sold it when the money ran out and his patient needed a huge amount of money for rehabilitation and care. He once thought he would be found dead with this cross. He would never give it up or sell it under any circumstances. This object was the one thing that connected him to his past life, where Mr. Matthew Pattison was a respected man, an associate professor in a department, deputy head of a hospital department, a loving and beloved husband and son. But how did his life change the day he returned from the hospital to collect a patient's chart he had been working on at home and found his wife and friend? That day, when he became an accidental witness to a crime, all his ideas about life, his principles and meanings all abruptly vanished somewhere. Now he was happy to sell the cross and do good. It seemed impossible to do otherwise. All the while the doctor was selflessly doing his work, remembering all the things he tried to forget. His patient looked at him and watched him with beautiful gray-green eyes. She looked at him every second he was with her. It was evident that the grief she remembered was so great that she could not bring herself to speak, in spite of all the kindness and warmth she received every day from her savior. One day, having finished his gymnastics with the patient, Mr. Matthew Pattison went to boil her some chicken broth. Despite the already protracted period of rehabilitation and the excessive care and guardianship, the woman was still in an extremely weak state. When the doctor returned with a plate of flavorful chicken broth on a tray, he was surprised. His patient usually dozed off after the grueling physical exertion she needed to rehabilitate her condition. But here she looked at him with wide-open eyes full of tears and suddenly said, "I've lost a child." Mr. Pattison almost knocked over a bowl of hot soup in surprise. Keeping his composure, he found the strength to place the plate carefully on the stool that served as his nightstand and table at the same time. "I'm sorry for your loss," said the doctor with a sigh. "I'm sorry I examined you, but you were not abused. Nor was there any sign that you had a miscarriage. I don't know what else to say." He continued to stare intently and sympathetically at the stranger who had become his dearest person, the meaning of his hitherto meaningless life. Paying no attention to the reaction and words of her interlocutor, turning to the emptiness inside herself, she continued. "Amelia. She was 2 months old, sudden infant death syndrome. I've been cursed since that day." Although she spoke detachedly and without emotion, large tears rolled down her cheeks in hailstones after she finished her sentence. Mr. Pattison realized that her little girl, her daughter, had died of sudden infant death syndrome, a phenomenon about which little is known in modern science. Simply, a baby under a year-old stops breathing and dies. The causes of this phenomenon have not yet been discovered. As a doctor, he realized that the woman was in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder. Apparently, one terrible psychological trauma was superimposed on another, no less dangerous for the psyche and for health in general. Having realized that it was pointless to answer, as the patient could not hear him and was talking to herself, he simply put his hand on her arm. Surprisingly, the patient jerked in surprise, lowered her gaze, but did not remove his hand. It was their first conversation, an attempt at communication. A fragile thread of trust began to form. And for his part, Mr. Matthew Pattison was making a great effort not to cut it off, but to strengthen it, without outwardly showing emotion or curiosity. He was sinking more and more into speculation as to what had happened. All that was known was that one, his patient had been pregnant, had given birth to a child, and 2 months later her daughter had died of sudden infant death syndrome. The second was that his patient had been horribly beaten, abused, and mutilated. This was done by a man with a clearly disturbed psyche who enjoyed it all, judging by the nature of the injuries. It appears that they tried to kill her, and perhaps even thought they had killed her. Thirdly, she was brought in her huge jeep to the dump by the local town landlord, a very rich and powerful man called Mr. John Stone, and threw her out like a dog. How interconnected is all of this? Whether and what these events had to do with each other, no one knew, except the silent patient herself. As the labor of curing and nursing became less strenuous and ceased to occupy all Mr. Patterson's thoughts, he began to think more and more about the situation that had occurred. No matter how hard he tried to piece together a coherent story that would more or less explain everything, nothing worked. He would never question a patient in such a state. It could definitely harm her, have a negative impact on both her physical and psycho-emotional state. It could destroy the fragile trust that had been built up between them, and then it would have been impossible to get her to talk, and the rehabilitation period would have increased many times over. So we just had to be patient and wait. A few weeks after the rescued woman spoke of her daughter. Not a word but thank you as he fed her and changed her clothes did the doctor hear from her. Sometimes it seemed like forever. More than 2 months had passed since that October night when Mr. Patterson had picked her up at the dumpster. It was the 14th of December on the calendar. The doctor carefully tore off the sheets each morning to keep track of the passage of time. Since his life had taken another turn and changed course, he had picked up many new habits, and some were simply resumed from a past life, like keeping a calendar and shaving every day. Standing at the sink, he performed his morning routine. He tore off a calendar page, starting a new day, and began to prepare everything he needed for shaving. Suddenly a voice sounded behind him, the timbrent sound of which he had already forgotten. Today is my daughter, Mia's, birthday. Today would have been her 1-year birthday. A year ago on this day I was the happiest woman in the world. All I can think about is what I did wrong to make my life turn from the peak of my happiness to absolute misery. But even at this point, the torrent of unhappiness has not left me. Mr. Matthew Patterson had long ago decided that when she spoke, he would be sure to ask her what her name was and introduce himself. Regardless of what she said or how offhanded his remark would be, he was tired of addressing her to himself as either patient or unfortunate. Even thought about giving her some sort of name to call her by, but changed his mind, finding it disrespectful. Taking a breath for courage and gathering his wits, he blurted out the text he had prepared in his head weeks ago and kept repeating to himself. My name is Mr. Matthew Patterson. That was my name back in the day, and I was a doctor in a rehab center. Now I'm mostly just Matt, an alcoholic who has slipped to the point of being homeless. On the night of 9/10 October, I found you in a dumpster in the town of Sviblov, where I saw you brought and dumped by Mr. John Stone. From that day on, I did everything I could to keep you alive, and I'm glad I helped you. How are you feeling? What's your name? He seemed to forget how to breathe when he said it. He said it without turning to her, fearing he wouldn't be able to say anything if he saw those eyes full of pain. Counting to 10, he decided it was time to turn round and see the reaction his words produced. But as soon as he turned round, she spoke. I realize that I am now indebted to you. I don't think I'm fully recovered yet. Not mentally, not physically. I realize that you are very interested to know my story, how what happened that led me to the rubbish dump where you rescued me. Please give me a little more time. I think I've just been able to start formulating something about and for myself. I'll be sure to tell you everything if you want me to, but a little later she said in a quiet and surprisingly calm voice. My name is Mary, she added quietly. The pleased Mr. Matthew Patterson could not find anything to say to her, but only smiled softly and quietly. It seemed to him that this would be the best way to show that he was not rushing her and was willing to wait until she was ready. Their life and communication had changed somewhat since then. They were still able to exchange a few everyday phrases of politeness. Mary began to get out of bed and to sit for long periods in a chair by the window, looking out, but she did not express any desire to get out of the house to get some air. Mr. Patterson understood that psychologically his house had become a place of strength for her, a place of refuge from all adversity, and she could not bring herself to leave it in such a state, even for a short walk. With the same calmness and in the same good-natured atmosphere, they celebrated the new year. Since there was no television in the house, there was a library of works of Russian and foreign classics. That's what the occasional neighbors did on long winter evenings, sit and read books. When Mr. Pattison went out of the house to the local village shop, he always overheard idle conversations that he had never cared for before. He felt that Mr. Stone must be looking for Mary dead or alive. This was very disturbing, for the doctor realized that he had no resources to protect her. One evening of the New Year's holiday, once again the power went out. And Mary, quite unexpectedly for Mr. Pattison, and for herself as well, which was noticeable, began to talk to him. "You know, I've always been a good girl from a good family. I was given the usual future in my circle marriage to a nice bloke from our circle, a couple of children. Everything probably should have gone according to plan, for I was not distinguished by a cheerful temperament and the typical exuberant adolescence of teenagers. I went to grammar school, went to art and music school, came home to a loving mom and dad, and no scandals, no arguments, no fights. I read about such things in newspapers and saw in popular talk shows. But there were no such problems among my acquaintances. No one drank or cheated. Everyone around me respected and loved each other. We spent all our holidays together," Mary continued. "Mom didn't work. She did the housework, but not to the detriment of her development. Dad could afford to support us and the domestic helpers. We didn't have excessive consumption or golden toilets, as was fashionable at the time. In general, a quiet existence of a cell of society. Everything collapsed at one moment, when my mummy was given a terrible diagnosis, protecting me to the end, despite my older teenage years. My parents did not inform me of it and hid everything to the last, citing fatigue and autumn moping. Mum was thinning, her face gaunt. She cut her gorgeous curly hair into a short man's haircut. Even then, it didn't make me suspicious. I guess it was because I was raised in safety and didn't feel the need to overshadow my childhood and adolescence. Mum's death I had to accept and feel not like Dad's in 6 months, but at an accelerated pace in a week, namely 6 days. It became pointless and impossible to hide it. Mum was taken to a hospice for palliative care. There was no hope. Lung cancer. Mum and Dad never smoked, though. Such a mockery of fate. And the first blow for me personally is that everything around me is not perfect," Mary said bitterly. "Fortunately, if I may say so, about the death of another person, however inevitable it was, Mummy did not suffer much and left quickly. Daddy and I rallied around the loss of a loved one. It's now I realize how lucky I was then. It could have gone much worse. But fate, having struck me, seemed to wave to me again with a smile. Again, everything went according to the scenario that was prepared for me from birth. I graduated from school and entered the faculty of teaching at the university without any problems. What bad choice for a girl from a good family." Mary grinned with a chuckle. A classic. And of course, it was not about a grandiose career in the field of national pedagogy. I was supposed to be able to work to earn my own petty cash, or at least have the knowledge to raise my own children adequately and thoroughly, Mary said. In her sophomore year, Kyle came into her life, positive from every angle. An engineer whose career was gaining momentum. Mary's dad and his family were thrilled with their union. Young, healthy, happy. Their whole lives ahead of them. What more could you ask for? In her 4th year, she got married. Everything was going according to plan. Another blow took Mary by surprise. A year and a half after the wedding, when she graduated from university, and they began to work closely on planning the expansion of their still small family, no one had diagnosed her with infertility. But a whole professor, a medical doctor, explained that she would have difficulty conceiving and carrying a child on her own. It was a thunderbolt. Where would such problems come from? Mary was outraged. The pre-pregnancy treatment process took 4 years. I lived in clinics, antenatal clinics, hospitals. I don't think there was a doctor I didn't consult. I flew to Germany and Israel. Everything was fine with Kyle, and IVF was recommended to me. Despite my never-ending desire to have a baby, I adamantly denied hormonal stimulation until I found out Kyle had started cheating on me. A young intern at his firm. That's when I realized I cared more about my family and decided to take the risk. I never told Kyle I found out about his cheating. What's the point? We're all good at psychology now. Back then, I went to endless counseling sessions and worked through my issues. And I was sure without a doubt that this cheating was a realization of masculinity, an attempt to prove that he was capable of anything, a manifestation of masculine dignity. I am still grateful to him for going with me all the way, all the clinics, all the procedures and ultrasounds. At all important stages, Kyle was always with Mary, After the final decision to undergo IVF, Kyle even broke up with his young mistress. He endured Mary's whims and tantrums, 2 failed IVF attempts, tears and sobs. 1 pregnancy just didn't happen. The second time, the embryo stopped developing in the 6th week of pregnancy. 3 weeks of happiness from the moment I found out I was pregnant to the ultrasound when I was told the baby was gone, Mary said. It feels like being thrown from the 10th floor onto the tarmac. Even breathing is unbearably painful. It feels like everything inside, all the bones are broken. Third attempt. Mary prayed to all the gods and put candles to all the saints. I think I prayed day and night, and in my sleep, she recalled. The pregnancy came and went well until the 4th month. Early in the morning, I woke up with an unbearable pain in my lower abdomen, a miscarriage. How I survived it, I don't even remember. I remember the IVs and the worried faces of my dad, Kyle, and his parents. I know you want to judge Kyle for having an affair, Mary continued. But even if he was to blame, the support and love he gave me at that time in my life made it all worth it. On top of that, my health was pretty badly compromised by the amount of drugs and hormones I was taking. I had to accept that there would be no more IVF courses, and that Mary would have to undergo a rather difficult period of rehabilitation. She spent 4 months in a regional boarding house where she was treated and recuperated. Again, a big thank you to my family for their support, Mary said. Thanks to them, I began to slowly come round and find the strength to move on with my life. The day before Mary was discharged, Kyle's parents were involved in a car accident. The terrible accident, caused by a drunk driver, took the lives of 2 people who had become her family. Kyle's mother, Mrs. Jennifer, was so affectionate, caring and understanding to Mary that in a way she replaced her own mother. For a year after their deaths, Mary and Kyle existed on autopilot. He went to work, she did something around the house. There were some chores and worries, but they never seemed to laugh once in the entire year, sullen and tired from all the hardships. That's how I would describe this period of my life, Mary recalled. The day passed, and well. Every day, I lay in the darkness of the marital bedroom where Kyle and I had once shared many beautiful moments, with only a thin ray of light shining through the tightly drawn curtains. I hardly ate, read anything, or turned on the huge plasma TV on the wall. I lay in the semi-darkness of the room and thought about nothing. I tried not to let a single thought enter my head, because then each one would echo with unbearable pain in my wounded heart and make me feel even worse. Kyle would leave for work every morning and return exactly 40 minutes after the end of the workday, which was the amount of time it took to get from work to home. He would return and lie down on the couch in the living room. Mary would lie in the bedroom, and he would lie in the living room. Once in a while, they would exchange the necessary household phrases, and that was all. Kyle was a shadow of the man Mary had married, and she was no better. It was as if they had gone into hibernation, into anabiosis, to try as much as possible to preserve, to accumulate all the vitality they had left after all their troubles. Sometimes it seemed like forever, that Mary and Kyle could never bring themselves to go back to their past lives. Suddenly one evening, Kyle didn't go straight to his favorite couch after coming home from work, but went into the bedroom and talked to Mary, which was surprising in itself. "We can't go on like this," Kyle said. "We have us, and we should thank the Almighty for that. Yes, after all the losses we've suffered, the pain that has come over us, it's not easy to go back to our past lives, but we have to try, for the sake of my mother's and father's memory, and for the sake of our unborn son." Then it became clear that this was not a sudden monologue as Mary had initially thought. At lunchtime, in order to keep communication with his colleagues to a minimum, Kyle began to visit a psychologist who had an appointment in the same business center, where Kyle's firm was located. I have to admit, his words had a profound effect on me, Mary recalled. I had never looked at the situation from the point of view that I would be ashamed in front of my family and friends who were not around. But what a life I lead. Sort of in remembrance of them, I became very ashamed of my mother, and of Mrs. Jennifer, my mother-in-law, and of my son, whom I couldn't even bury. That sudden evening dialogue with Kyle and then therapy with a psychoanalyst helped us a lot. Mary and Kyle began to come back to life. Yes, slowly, but it was already a huge step. On the recommendation of the psychologist the two of them started seeing, they decided to go on holiday. Given the life they had been leading for the last year, and to be honest, Mary personally for the last 3, they realized they needed a reboot. It seemed that the sea air and sunshine would help rehabilitate their emotional state. If I had known how this trip was going to end, I would have been better off killing myself straight away, Mary said. Why do grief and unhappiness come at a time when you are happy? The highest point of life satisfaction is followed by absolute and unbearable unhappiness. They decided to fly to Italy. They spent a long time choosing hotels, excursions and leisure activities that kept them busy and distracted them from their usual thoughts. Finally, everything was ready. Making their own travel arrangements distracted and mobilized them. Mary and Kyle began to socialize more, talking more than out of sheer necessity. The holiday started off beautifully. They did a lot of walking, sunbathing, swimming, touring local attractions, and even socializing with other tourists. It was amazing how each day the ice wall between them grew thinner and thinner. They shut off from the rest of the world by the dome, began to film it for the rest of the world and for each other. It was as if they were on their honeymoon. Mary and Kyle were getting reacquainted with each other, holding hands, needing each other. Another evening after the tour was spent at a fancy restaurant. After a delicious dinner and a few glasses of delicious Italian wine, Mary and Kyle decided to end the evening with a walk along the beach. They walked and enjoyed the sea, the unbearably beautiful sunset, and each other's long-forgotten company. They seemed to remember why they loved each other and began to realize that they were not ready to give up what was between them and what was still possible in the future. The breathtakingly beautiful tale of that night ended expectantly with intimacy. They hadn't been together since the night Mary lost the baby. It was a night of love and magic. It seemed like that magic would last forever. That night changed everything. They returned from their holiday a different person, not even the same person who was then expecting a baby, a long-awaited baby. After so many years of waiting and failed attempts, renewed versions of new happiness, they couldn't get enough of each other, and it seemed that the world consisted of the two of them. No one else was needed. They were happy absolutely and unconditionally. A month after they returned from Italy, Mary was flying on the wings of love. And so was Kyle. She'd never seen him so happy. The morning sickness caught her off guard. She was completely unprepared for it. Her mind just collapsed. The thought of being pregnant was something she just hadn't allowed for. She was prepared immediately for the worst. The certainty that she would be taken by the disease that was coming for her mother became her obsession. The neurosis was getting worse, and she kept winding herself up. Mummy had a hereditary form of cancer, and I refused to take tests and markers to find out if I had got this genetic bomb, because I was afraid of going mad when I heard the disappointing diagnosis Mary recalled, plus hormone therapy and support for IVF. I couldn't think of anything good. I was sure I was dying. She forced herself to go to the doctor just to find out how much time she had left. I wanted to prepare Kyle for another loss. She wanted to finish all the things she'd started, to take stock of her life. She rejected the treatment right away, even without a doctor's consultation. I saw how hard Mummy had to go, despite the expensive and painful treatment. How she suffered, Mary said. I didn't want to torture myself, Kyle, and my dad. Making my father go through this a second time. Unbearable and unimaginable. She spent a long time going to her GP to be referred to a more specialist based on her test results for a consultation. Twice she canceled the appointment, and once she ran right out of the lobby of the private health clinic where she had an appointment. Fear haunted Mary every day. She felt worse and worse. The nausea wouldn't let up. The only thing that made her gather all her remaining strength and go to the doctor was when her husband Kyle became suspicious and asked her how she was feeling. By the time she talked to him and had a final explanation, she wanted to know all the details and timelines. God only knew what she was going through and how to muster the courage and strength to walk into the doctor's office. She sank down on the chair in front of him and cried. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. For about 15 minutes they tried to calm her down and give her water so that she could tell him what she had come in with. When the tears finally stopped and the sedative drops had taken effect, she said to the doctor in a quiet voice, "I am dying and I want to know when." I think the doctor himself was taken aback. Such patients apparently were not often in his competence. Now I even think that he wanted to escort her to the other wing of the clinic, where private psychiatry was located. Pulling himself together, the doctor began to question her about the symptoms of her mysterious illness. After listening to her to the end, The doctor gave her a full-mouth smile, which she found extremely offensive. "I actually came for a terminal diagnosis and was planning to pass away soon," Mary said. Continuing to smile, the doctor opened his desk drawer and started rummaging through it. After a few seconds, he placed a rapid pregnancy test in front of her and said, "I think you should take the test to determine your due date more accurately. I recommend you take a HCG blood test. But based on your symptoms and some of the outward signs I'm seeing, I'm willing to bet my head that you're pregnant." That's the last thing she remembered. Next thing you know, she's waving a fan and smelling a pungent odor. Turns out she fainted. Mary never for a second allowed herself to think she might be pregnant. Firstly, the initial difficulties with conception she later recalled, plus the diagnosis. Secondly, even the treatment didn't help us. Mom's medical history, our long-term depression. Mary could have suspected anything, but certainly not pregnancy. The doctor wouldn't risk letting her go into the ladies' room alone. He gave her a nurse to accompany her. She couldn't go on her own. She used to think that like a bag of dust was a beautiful phraseology, but it really wasn't. A very understandable condition for her now. Overwhelming to the extreme, the mixture of feelings and emotions that came over her was simply inexpressible in words. 10 minutes later, they were back in the office. The nurse practically carried her on her back, for her legs were almost weakened with joy. "I'm pregnant," Mary said. A complex range of feelings and emotions. She was immediately given an ultrasound and heard her baby's heartbeat for the first time. As it turned out, it was timely, given her diagnosis, previous problems with conception, and the course of the pregnancy. The decision was made to put her in hospital for preservation. She will never forget Kyle's emotion and voice when she called him from the ambulance and said, "I need some personal items as I'm being put on conservatorship." Pause. A few rhetorical questions, and then screaming, crying, and exclamations of absolute happiness. He reached the hospital at the same time as she was being taken by ambulance. How happy he was. It wasn't until a few days later that Mary realized their happiness. Although her pregnancy had not been easy, she had been kept in labor. Toxicosis plagued her throughout her pregnancy. Every other day she was given very painful drips, from which all the veins disappeared. But it was nothing. She was absolutely and infinitely happy. A month and a half later, they found out they were having a girl and immediately decided on the name Mia. Mia was a beautiful and holy name, like a patron saint for their little girl's amulet. Kyle ran around the baby shops and seemed to have bought up the entire range: 2 cots, several prams, tons of toys, and everything needed to care for a baby. When he visited her at the hospital every day after work, they laughed that if this kept up, they would have to buy a new flat to store all the goodies he had acquired. In the 38th week of her pregnancy, her stomach began to pull unbearably, and Mary asked her obstetrician-gynecologist to be the one to call, even though it was night time. Despite the happiness that enveloped her, the anxiety wouldn't let go. All the negative experiences and all the previous losses were weighing on her, even though she was careful to keep them away. Knowing her, their history, Kyle and her father, the doctor flew to the hospital 20 minutes later, did a cursory examination, and said, "It is necessary to perform an emergency C-section. There is life-threatening danger to both you and your daughter." Mary made the decision not to bother either her husband or her dad, to resign herself to fate and tell the facts their nerves and worry would change nothing, but only hurt the staff and themselves. At 6:05, Mary became a happy mom. The most beautiful daughter in the world. 51 centimeters, 3 kilograms, and 60 grams. "My happiness just couldn't fit inside me," she said. If there is an infinite, dimensionless, and absolute happiness in life, she experienced it then. That day at the discharge from the maternity hospital, her father furtively wiped away tears, and her husband cried and was not even going to hide it. It seems that this moment was the happiest in the life of each of them. It took them more than 2 hours to get home, because Kyle was driving 20 kilometers per hour in the leftmost lane and refused to increase the speed. Happiness was new to them. They went to it for so long, fought so hard for it, that they simply could not lose it, and did everything to prevent it from happening. As it turned out, it was in vain. Their fate reminded them again that not everything is in their hands, that nothing depends on them. All their control and attempt to manage life processes is an empty endeavor. On the 16th of February, when their daughter Mia was 2 months and 2 days old, she did not wake up. She simply forgot how to breathe and her heart stopped. There are no words to describe their grief. Just as there were no words to describe their happiness when she was born, there are absolute grief now. It is hard to imagine the existence of a person whom Mary would wish to go through it. Nor had they gone through it, not her, not Kyle, not her father. They crawled because it broke them not in half, but into hundreds of millions of little pieces. They were all together. They had only them in the whole world, and the center of their world was their baby, their little Mia. With her gone, it was as if the magnet that pulled the three of them together around her was gone. The pain of her leaving was unbearable and unending. And it wasn't just her they'd lost. They began to lose each other and themselves. "Mr. Matthew, it's morning," Mary stammered. "Do you want to know the whole story now?" He could not answer at once. He sat and furtively wiped away his tears. He didn't have children, as it happened, but the way Mary told it, the way she looked at him, it would have moved a stone. Mr. Matthew was in a lot of pain and fear. He realized that this was not the end. After all, there was something else that had brought her to the ill-fated junkyard in the boot of the local authorities' car. "Mary, I don't want to force you to do anything," the doctor finally found himself. "As you see fit, based on your feelings." "All right, then I'll tell you the whole story at once. It won't hurt me anymore. I was already dead then, that morning of the 16th of February. A silence fell over them. Mary was gathering her thoughts to continue her monologue, and Mr. Matthew was thinking what a scoundrel he was. He dared to feel sorry for himself. "Oh my God," he reasoned to himself. "How could you, a healthy grown man, break down like that over such a trifle, such a trifle?" The woman left. So what? She cheated, she betrayed him, her friend betrayed her. And what did you do better for anyone? Maybe to yourself that after that you started betraying yourself, drowning in your grief at the bottom of a bottle. He looked at his life from the outside and was horrified at what had broken him. He felt so sorry for himself. Is it really true? His self-abuse was interrupted by Mary's voice. 16th February. Yes, but that was the day my life collapsed. It's terrible that I remember every detail, every second, like in slow motion. As a psychiatrist later explained to me, this phenomenon is called psyche, a special neurological condition that can be caused, among other things, by a particularly traumatic situation. Oh yeah, that was the situation. And it couldn't get any worse. Mary remembered everything. The eyes of the ambulance doctor, the tears of the nurse, the sympathetic apology of the police officers who had to question them about the circumstances of the incident. She remembered the report the medical examiner had given them and his lengthy explanation that no one was insured. It happens. And so they entered this sad but commonplace statistic. The hardest for Mary was the moment of the funeral. She remembered her mum's funeral, her mother-in-law's funeral, and her father-in-law's funeral. But her daughter's death hurt deeply then, terribly intense pain. But these were people who had lived a life. As she stood over the grave, which was tiny with a small headstone, all in flowers and toys, it shouldn't be like that. It was impossible for it to be like that. Like Mary had said, after the funeral, which with their troubles had kept them at least somewhat together and forced them to coordinate and talk, Dad, Kyle and her, had withdrawn into themselves. They had simply become strangers to each other. With Kyle, each was living their own grief and no one wanted to share it, each protecting it from the other. "We didn't talk to my husband about our daughter's death after her funeral," Mary said. "I don't know what we were thinking, that it might smooth things over. That silence was the answer. Dad would call sometimes asking how we were. Yes, how we were. We were alive and we weren't happy about it. That's how we were. The cruelty and injustice was killing me. I was given and immediately taken away, as if some sadist was having fun with me in secret." We spent 2.5 months in silence. Kyle took a holiday and sat on the couch like he did then, and Mary lay in her bedroom with the blinds drawn. All the happiness we'd been given had taken more than we'd given, ripped it out with a piece of heart. Then we existed like that for a year. I realized I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to be the naive person who hopes again and goes after a phantom dream. I realized I had to break it off. I called my father and asked his permission to stay at his house in Seattle, a remote gated community where no one cares about anyone. Perfect for a voluntary hermit. I remember gaining the strength to talk to my husband. It was much calmer than I expected. Maybe we just didn't have the energy to make a scene, to be nervous, to worry. "Kyle, I want to leave. I can't go on like this," I said. "You're a very good man, and I'll always be grateful for everything we've had, for your help in those moments of happiness. I no longer want to wait for happiness like manna from heaven, to enjoy it, and then physically feel that I have to recover again from grief, from myself, from everyday worries after another disaster. It's petty, selfish, and cowardly. But I want to escape from everything, including myself. Please give me that opportunity. Without judging me, let me go." And he let go. Thank him for that. He didn't push me, he didn't beg me. I couldn't take it, I couldn't resist. I just didn't have the strength for it. That's how I ended up here in this village. Mary was silent, and for the first time since she had begun to share the tragic story of her life with a complete stranger, she stood up. She went to the cooker, lit the gas, and poured water into the kettle. "Would you like tea or coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please, Mary. Tea," Mr. Matthew Pattison said almost immediately. He realized that she had passed one milestone and was preparing for the second. According to her, of course, nothing could be worse than her daughter's death. And there was no arguing with that. What happened to her, however, happened to her. Somehow she herself had ended up dying in a rubbish dump, and someone had done it to her. And he was sure that this pain had not yet subsided either, and had brought her huge scars on her heart that had just begun to heal. The old man's heart clenched at the memory of the condition in which he had found her, and how much effort he had put in, so that now, nearly 4 months later, Mary could stand and walk unsupported. Mary, standing over the kettle, thought for a moment. She was working out in her head the chronology and the important details of what she wanted to tell this kind old man, how she had ended up in the unfortunate cellar, and how she had pretended to be dead to survive against all odds. The kettle whistled on the cooker and made Mary snap out of her reverie, out of the thoughts that plagued her. Removing the kettle from the cooker, she stirred the boiling water into mugs, poured the brew, and, limping slightly, went to the table, placing a cup in front of Mr. Matthew Pattison. She went on to recount what had happened to her. "As you probably know, real estate is extremely expensive in Seattle, and there are only a few houses where people live all year round," Mary said. "Mostly everyone comes on weekends or holidays. And then there are the security guards who walk around the community in these gated homes where the owners have deemed their presence necessary, and the endless house helpers. When I arrived with 1 suitcase of belongings and 2 bags of groceries, I heard a ringing silence, no voices or sounds, and therefore no people. It was what I needed in the state of mental turmoil I was in. Dad called me every day at first. Apparently he was very worried that I might do something to myself, but every day my voice got more cheerful, and I guess that calmed him down. At first he kept threatening to come over, or at least to send Jess, his constant housekeeper, to help me clean up the house. There hadn't been anyone for over a year, as my father only came up there on holiday to fish in the quiet of the river. He missed this year's holiday because he was with me all the time. I was in hospital at the time, and he came and entertained me. I arrived, and for the first few days I started tidying up and general cleaning on my own. Things that Jess hadn't had time to clean in the few days that Daddy allotted her, giving her an ultimatum that he was going fishing. The quiet and physical activity began to heal me little by little. Seemingly daily, tired from doing so many things, I stopped hearing my incessant thoughts and had a dialogue with my inner self. This was what was needed when the housework was over. The only entertainment left was books. Dad had moved the entire home library here. I realized what I was missing. When I wore myself out physically, my body channeled all its resources into recovery. And I had no time to think. As I said at the beginning, my parents were very active in developing me as a child, taking me to music and art school. But sport for a girl at that time seemed secondary and optional. There was never a place for serious physical activity in my life, and I decided to fix it. And one May day, the weather was sunny and warm. And I put on shorts, a t-shirt and trainers, and went jogging for the first time. At first, my jogging around the village might have made the occasional spectator laugh. Fortunately, there were none. I ran for a couple of minutes and gasped. then walked for 10 minutes as I had no energy to run. But I didn't give up. Every day I increased the pace and the amount of exertion. For one reason, I was exhausting myself, and at night I fell asleep without dreams, which constantly haunted me, not allowing me to rest even a few hours. I had no dreams, no nightmares, and no creepy night thoughts during bouts of insomnia. For this I was ready to run and run even faster and even further. Now every day, regardless of the weather or how I felt, started with a run. I ran without looking back, as if I wanted to run away from my past and was very afraid that it would catch up with me. For the rest of May, summer, and September, every day was like the other. I would get up in the morning and run through the village along the riverbank, through the forest. No matter how I felt, no matter what weather was waiting outside my window. I would come from my run and read something that had helped me with all my problems since childhood. I would read books and enter another world where there was no me, no my problems. There was a whole other world that I could escape to from all the hustle and bustle. If I felt I wasn't too tired, I would force myself to go out for an evening jog, all just to get through the evening and get through the night. And then the morning. A new day, as they say, the day is done. And thank goodness for that. And that's how I climbed through my life, from one week to the next. And I was grateful for that. I didn't stop being sick, but somehow I lived. I found a way to live. Running hardened and strengthened not only my body, but also my spirit. I had never seen such muscles. I lost a lot of weight and muscles were showing all over my body. My stamina surprised me. I was running 20 kilometers a day, and when I ran, I didn't think about anything. It was as if running was my natural form of existence. And if I didn't run, I would fall and die. I couldn't run without it, like I couldn't breathe. The only one of my rare interlocutors was my dad, who no longer called every day but still steadily dialed me once a week to make sure everything was okay. Kyle didn't call me, but a couple of times my dad said my husband called him to check on me. I was eternally grateful to him for being so sensitive and respectful of my request, for preserving the little world I'd created for myself. Sometimes it was very rare for me to leave the gates of the village to go to the shop, and I made do with really little. I shopped at the local small shop on the territory of the settlement. There were two cheerful saleswomen, Meg and Zoe. They tried to talk to me, but gave up, as did the security guys at the checkpoint. I occasionally exchanged a few words with them when I ran past, or on the rare trips out of the grounds. But my main interlocutor was a guard at one of the houses on our street. Mr. Tom, as I had called him since my youth when we bought the house, was an extremely good-natured and quiet, non-elderly man. It is unlikely that his function for the last 10 years was really security. I think the landlord didn't want to dismiss him out of sentimental feelings, and I think Mr. Tom had nowhere else to go. He lived in a small house on the edge of the property, in a hut behind the guest house. Mr. Tom was known for his tact and unobtrusiveness. Perhaps even my father had alerted him to my condition. He kept in touch with him too. Occasionally he'd invite him round for some small jobs. Be that as it may, over the months the not-so-young guard became the person I interacted with the most. A calm and modest man, non-drinker. Contrary to stereotypes, he smiled and greeted me kindly, but never insisted on conversation, though he was happy to keep it going if I stopped to talk. On the very day that you, Mr. Matthew Pattison, found me on the rubbish bin, I took a little rest after lunch and went out for a second run, thinking I wasn't tired enough. I had never run to music. I needed complete silence and no associations, which only made for unnecessary thoughts, which is what I was trying to avoid. Putting on leggings and a t-shirt, I thought it would be chilly even with the intense running, and threw on a windbreaker. As soon as I stepped out of the gate and closed it behind me, I saw Mr. Tom standing in the road looking around. With a quick step to warm up for the run, I walked up to him. "Mr. Tom, what's the matter?" I asked. "Oh, the car gave me a fright." Mr. Tom turned round abruptly, apparently lost in his own thoughts. Did you see it? "Mr. John Stone's here," he said. I don't even know who that is, I wondered. "You don't know who he is?" The old man was surprised. "His house is right by the river, and the fence is so close to the lake that you can't walk along the shore. Though it is forbidden, though he is not allowed to do it." "Of course," I said. "Indeed, there is a house at the end of our street, the richest, and the fence blocks the way. You have to go round this area, and it's huge. "So here you are," said Mr. Tom, clearly wary of the fact. "What's the trouble?" I've never seen him before, and I've never seen any life in this house. No lights, no sounds. So he's not coming for a long time, and will be gone soon, I surmised. "Yes, he's an unpleasant type, in the old man's way," said the guard. "He supposedly comes with his niece, and every time she's new and looks like that. It's disgusting." "No big deal. It's such a time. Everyone has fun as he wants," I answered. "That's true. But he's a very unpleasant man. When he comes for a couple of days a few times a year, I feel uncomfortable. I can't wait for him to go back to his capital with his niece. I hope he'll have a brief visit this time," as always said Mr. Tom. "That would be nice," I said, trying to cheer the old man up. "Are you going to run again? You're not taking care of yourself, girl. You've already got one skeleton left of you, and you're studying muscles on it. You're punishing yourself." I didn't want to answer that, nor did I want to develop this thought. So I thought I'd just say goodbye kindly. "Yes, Mr. Tom, I'll be off. It'll be dark soon enough." "Go on, girl, take care of yourself." He waved me off. I began to pick up the pace for a regular run. I didn't have my watch with me. I never took anything with me, not even my keys. I just hid them in the cachepot on the porch. Although, to be honest, that was an unnecessary precaution too. It felt like I'd been gone over an hour. I jogged to the other end of the village, turned a little, ran down a wooded alley, and then decided to walk back along the riverbank. Mr. Tom's wariness surprised me and interested me a little. So I decided to run along the bank to Mr. John Stone's house. What if I saw him or his niece along the river? I made it to the big fence without seeing or hearing anything. I can't say I was too upset about it. I decided to take one last run around his property along the fence, run to the end of our street, and come back at a brisk pace. That's how I like to end my run, rounding a huge metal fence with no gaps. I suddenly noticed that the gate was slightly ajar. A huge SUV was parked in the backyard near the garage exit, and something at the bottom of the boot door caught my eye. I slowed my step and then stopped and began to look closely at the boot. At first I thought I was imagining things, but no. The boot was closed, and there was white hair sticking out of it, and I think there was something red on it. Curious and forgetting about caution, I literally walked into the fenced area like a trance and headed for the boot. As I leaned over, I realized it was hair and not something red, but real blood. I didn't have time to collect my thoughts and come up with a plan. Out of the corner of my ear, I heard a sound, but it was too late. Someone came up behind me and stabbed me in the neck. It took me a while to wake up, apparently. I was in some kind of concreted room with no windows and no sunlight. There was a light bulb directly above me. When I woke up, I felt stiff in my movements. Sure enough, I was sitting on a chair and I was bound. My mouth was also taped shut. There was no one else in the room but me. But as I looked around, I saw a burgundy liquid beside me. On the floor, naturally, was the blood of the girl whose hair had drawn me here. It's hard to describe my emotions at that moment. At first, I began to berate myself and scold myself. I'd have to be so stupid to get caught like that. Where did this curiosity come from? Why did I come in? Why didn't I call for help? Why didn't I expect an attack? Anyway, at first I was restrained by the natural urge of self-preservation instinct. After a short break, the self-abuse mode was replaced by a different attitude. The desire I'd been chasing away since February woke up. I began to think with relief that I would finally be reunited with my little daughter, Mia. And that thought gave me a kind of peace that kept me from panicking and hysterical. I don't know how long I indulged in these thoughts, but suddenly the door opened and an attractive middle-aged man walked in. Average height, stocky, short, but well-groomed and handsome. There was no doubt about it, it was Mr. John Stone. "So we've met," I grinned to myself. "Yeah, you nosy little shit. Are you awake and awake?" said the man in a pleasant baritone. "Why did you come in here? Who asked you to?" He asked questions as if expecting an answer. Though, considering he'd taped my mouth shut, it would be strange to expect any excuses from me. "Maybe it's a good thing I got you," though Mr. John Stone continued. "That wench I brought back didn't amuse me much. I was hoping for a longer conversation, and she spoilt it. The bastard threw herself at the knife on purpose. The smile with which he said those vile things made cold sweat trickle down my back. I really hoped I could pass out. As luck would have it, my body had mobilized and I was more alert than ever. Before we begin our communication, we need to clarify a few details. Who are you? And who would know you're here? I realized it wasn't just me I was scared of. It was now clear that Mr. Tom's life was in danger too. As he took a few steps towards me, he jerked the tape sharply. Answer me, you bitch. I don't like repeating myself twice. You'll be very sorry if you make me show you how much I don't like it. I'm Mary. I wanted to take a moment to collect my thoughts, but I didn't know how to do it safely. I don't think you realize the gravity of the situation. I said, who knows you're here? The tone with which he said it clearly made it clear that the maniac did not intend to joke. Moreover, he struck my solar plexus with his fist. If my shoulders had not been tightly pressed against the back of the chair, I would have bent double from the pain that pierced my body. Taking a knife out of his pocket, he smiled, brought it up to my face and said, see what I have. I'm going to stab you with it next, so think carefully before you answer. I guess for him the answer followed too quickly, since he didn't throw another punch. But for me, my life was flashing before my eyes. Before he walked in, I was ready to accept my fate humbly and go to my little daughter Mia. But the moment Mr. John Stone struck and everything went black before my eyes, I remembered another moment of my life quite inappropriately, how Kyle had walked into my bedroom, and we had talked about how we had no right to live like this. That we should remember and live in remembrance of our family and friends who were no longer with us. That they would not be happy to see us like this. That we should live and fight and try to build our lives anew. At that moment, I felt very ashamed in front of my mummy, my unborn son and my daughter Mia, that I could not let myself give up so easily, give myself to this maniac. I needed a chance, even the tiniest one. My instinct for self-preservation rebelled. My mind seemed completely out of control of what I was saying. I live in the Jackson house. It's my father's, but I live alone. The only person who saw me today was Mr. Tom from next door. I blurted it out and only then realized he wouldn't stop. It's easier for him to take out the hypothetical threat of Mr. Tom to ensure he covers his crimes. Now it made sense to me who the nieces were and why they only came once. Is that the houseboy who thinks he's a security guard? The old man? Mr. John Stone was looming over me with a frightful smile that turned my insides upside down. Yes, I had no choice but to confirm what I had already said. I'll be back soon, baby. Just you wait for me. Really wait for me. He laughed evilly and walked out. Something was drilling into my soul. On the one hand, I was panicking that I had set up a good and kind man who was innocent. On the other hand, having Mr. John Stone around just paralyzed me with fear. I was ready to do anything to make him go away. He was gone indefinitely, so it seemed to me. I hated myself and went through my thoughts as to why I had seen fit to delay my own death at the cost of another man's death while Mr. John Stone was not yet back. I held out hope that I could get out, but as soon as the door slammed shut, I tried to free myself. It was no use. Absolutely pointless. I was duct taped to the chair. Apparently the previous girl was tied up not so qualitatively, and it spoilt the maniac's holiday. So he tried very hard with me, not making such mistakes. Every arm, every leg was wrapped with several layers of duct tape. My back was tied intentionally too, both around my shoulders and stomach. My thoughts were spinning and spinning, and there was no stopping them. I had never felt like such a creep before. My conscience was working harder than ever. As I went over my options for release, I realized the futility of my attempts. He won't let me go. The fate of all his nieces awaits me. Terror and fear gripped me and ate away at my insides. When Mr. John Stone returned, smiling full mouth, I was exhausted with myself. I didn't have the strength to resist or give in or try to free myself. I decided to take it as it came. I had no way out, and all I was excited about was meeting Mia, my daughter. What I'd have to go through before that seemed like an inevitability. That's it, sweetie. It's just the two of us now, and no one's going to get in our way. He almost sang in his own voice. I noticed blood on the lapel of his tracksuit. It didn't seem to be there when he left. Mr. Tom. The thought that I was responsible for the death of a man, such a good man, suddenly gripped my heart. The pain was unbearable. Apparently, I collapsed from a heart attack. That's all I remember. She didn't say another word, and there was silence. Mr. Matthew Pattison was again wiping away a stingy male tear. He seemed to have cried more this evening and night than he had cried in all his previous life. How had this thin young woman borne it all? Why had she suffered so much evil? This childish and naive thought gave him no rest. His wounded soul demanded justice. If not for himself, then for the other young and innocent. I think it was running that saved me, Mary said suddenly, and the phrase brought Mr. Matthew Pattison out of his trance. Running saved me. Mary continued as if she were talking to herself. The muscles and stamina of my body through exercise have reached a magnitude unprecedented for a woman that Mr. John Stone did not expect. Didn't believe I could survive all those injuries. It's a good thing I don't remember it. I only saw the aftermath when I regained consciousness, thanks to you. And I guess it's no fun playing with a mouse that doesn't react. The equanimity and indifference with which Mary spoke of it shocked the doctor. It was as if she were musing about a football match, something so utterly mediocre and trivial that it was not worthy of the least bit of her attention. Mr. Matthew Pattison's only concern was twofold: why Mary had never decided to contact her husband and father. After all, she could have asked him for the phone a long time ago. And secondly, he wondered if she really blamed herself for Mr. Tom's death. Mr. Matthew Pattison knew him. Tom had gone missing in October, around the same time the doctor had brought a wounded and crippled Mary home. No public attention was drawn to the man's disappearance. He's gone, and that's fine. Now, Mr. Matthew Pattison himself, of course, thought it strange that he had not connected the two facts, though at the time he did not care, as long as he could shelter and protect Mary and help her to get back on her feet. After thinking about it, the doctor made up his mind nevertheless and asked Mary. Asked her both questions. He asked, and Mary was silent. Mr. Matthew Pattison realized that it was impossible, that her psyche wasn't ready yet. Reprimanding himself mentally, he got up from the table and went to the door to give Mary some time to herself. "I'll get that." Her voice caught him off guard. "First to the second question, if you don't mind, as it will partly be the answer to the first." Mr. Matthew Pattison walked on in silence and sat down in his seat. "You see," Mary went on, "I've been thinking about this all the time I've been with you. Is it my fault? Yes and no. I suppose there are people who would have died but would have protected an old man in the same situation, hidden it. And there are people who wouldn't have needed that blow. They told and showed everything at once. But one should blame first of all the person who forces these people, puts them in these circumstances. I have come to this conclusion. It was that guilt that was eating me up. I am the victim who wanted to shoulder the entire load of guilt and drive it on myself, giving up my father just to hurt myself more, to punish myself even more. It's only in the last few days that something clicked in me and I realized that, firstly, by refusing to communicate and not letting my father know where I am, I'm hurting him, not myself. And secondly, I want to do everything I can to make sure that the really guilty one is held accountable for what he has done. Mr. Pattison, it's dawn. I think it's time for us to get out of the house and make some calls. Of course, I want to call my dad first, but then I want to call law enforcement as well. Tell me, can I ask you to not only help me with this, but ask you to continue to be my guardian angel, to come to town with me and live with us as a friend, as a good angel? I see that you are punishing yourself for something too. And I want to thank you by doing something for you. You saved my life. I know you sold that image of Mum's to cure me. I heard you talking to yourself when you thought I was unconscious. I'll never forget that." Mary looked at the old man with tears in her eyes and waited for his answer. He looked at her, crying and smiling. They left the house together and, holding hands, went to the nearest neighbors, from whom they could ask to transfer to Mr. Matthew Pattison Ruhr 100 for the telephone, which he had again forgotten to pay. The man never recognized bank cards, considering them too insistent a manifestation of capitalism. "Hello, Dad, it's me, Mary," she said into the receiver. And tears of happiness flowed down her cheeks again. "Daughter," she heard the man's excited voice in reply. He could not believe his ears, as he was sure that he would never hear or see his daughter again. "I've got the police on my ear," he continued. "We've been looking for you for so long. Where are you? What's wrong with you? Do you need any help?" Mary's family had been worried since the day she stopped contacting them. They immediately contacted the police, but for a long time the search was fruitless. It was only after they found a man in a wooded area who could barely move, sleeping in a small hut and covering a wound that had not yet fully healed with his own piece of trousers, that things started to move. How Mr. Tom had survived was a great mystery, but it was he who had helped to arrest Mr. John Stone, the man who had tortured and destroyed innocent girls for years. "Oh, come on," exclaimed Mary, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Mr. John Stone is in prison?" "Yes, my daughter, yes," replied the father. "Come home." Mary made up with Kyle, who had been at odds with her since her disappearance. Mr. Matthew Pattison was finally back to normal and was even able to return to his medical practice. The case involving Mr. John Stone received huge publicity, and the doctor who saved the woman became a prominent figure. Despite his difficult reputation, Mr. Matthew Pattison received job offers from several hospitals and chose the one he liked. Mary and Kyle took Mr. Tom, and after he was discharged from the hospital, he was still working as a security guard, only now in a safe environment. And a few months after everything happened, Mary and Kyle learned the happy news that she was expecting a baby again, and once again she couldn't find a place to be with worry and excitement. But it was all in vain. The pregnancy was surprisingly easy, and when the due date came, a long-awaited daughter was born, whom the happy parents named Mia. "It was a gift from fate," said Mary through her tears. "It's your reward," replied Kyle. "Your reward for not giving up, for everything you've been through, and a little bit of mine." Hugging his wife tightly, Kyle looked lovingly at Mew sleeping in her cot. And for the first time in a long time, he and Mary believed that there was happiness after all. Olivia was beginning to lose patience. She'd been preparing for this evening since yesterday, shopping, cleaning the apartment, preparing all sorts of appetizers and entrees for the family and friends. And now she was sitting there listening to her husband mock her. Adrian has an amazing ability to find a flaw in everything. Moreover, this gift is revealed in the presence of strangers, and when she and her husband are alone, more sensitive, loving and affectionate husband cannot find. But when the third, fourth, 10th person showed up, he was a fountain of sarcastic remarks about Olivia. This time she was the protagonist of the bad joke. "I passed by a hairdresser's yesterday," Adrian said. "Looking out the window, my wife was sitting in a chair, and the master was working on her. I think I'll wait. She comes out, and what do you think?" "A bald haircut." His sister Emma chuckled, running her spoon into the salad bowl to make herself a Caesar dressing. "I wish they'd shaved her bald," Adrian laughed, and that laugh was like a sharp arrow through Olivia's body, electrocuting her brain and making her tense. She'd been dyed red. You wouldn't believe it, her hair was the color of copper wire. "What about you?" my mother-in-law asked, snacking on a ham and cheese roll. "I'm sure I kicked her back to the hairdresser's to change her hair color." "Yeah, now. So she can pay those barbers and hairdressers again? I made her dye her hair at home. If you look closely, you can even see that not all of her hair is dyed. There's copper coming through, look closely." The guests laughed, eyeing Olivia's hair, and she sat there red with embarrassment. Every time Adrian mocked her, she wanted to get up and leave. One time she had done just that, but then there had been such an enormous scandal. "You have no respect for my family," Adrian yelled. "They don't come to visit us often enough to be disrespected like this. How could you do this to them?" Olivia stood there like a delinquent child with her head down, unable to say anything to her husband. She regretted leaving the table 100 times over. She should have been patient. But this time the cup of patience was overflowing. No, she would not repeat the last attempt and leave the living room at the table she herself had lavishly set and her husband's relatives feasting. But she had to stop this bacchanalia, or it would never end. When the guests were a little tired of laughing at the color of Olivia's hair, poured the liquor into shot glasses and started snacking again, she said. "The other day I went to the orphanage where your children live. I looked at them, brought gifts and sweets. You know, they're so cute. Why don't we take them for the weekend? The principal said it's possible. The room fell silent. The room fell silent as they heard Olivia's words. She raised her glass of wine as if nothing had happened. Adrian, let's drink to the children you abandoned. I wish them to find decent parents, more worthy than you. A second later, her husband's heavy hand came down on her cheek. Her face flamed, burning as if it had been scorched by 100 tongues of flame. Adrian reached up, grabbed her hair roughly, and pulled her away from the table. During her happy student years, Olivia fell in love. Kieran was 2 years older than her and had already graduated from the military academy. He was as handsome as God, and when Olivia saw him in his uniform for the first time, the ground swam under her feet. He was tall, slender, with radiant brown eyes that looked like velvet, and he seemed to her like a man of unearthly beauty. They met on May Day in the city park. Olivia and her friend Mel were walking along an alley. The weather lavished the small riverside town with sunshine and warmth. A light breeze fluttered the white silk scarf around Olivia's neck. Suddenly it flew off her shoulders, carried by the wind, and flew away. Oops, the girl caught herself and rushed after him. She ran, and the handkerchief fluttered and fluttered in the wind. As soon as the airflow subsided a little, it dropped to the pavement next to the strange guy. He picked up the silk scarf and held it out to Olivia. Is it yours? The boy asked, not even thinking to address the strange girl as you. Yes, thank you, she replied, and reached out to take the handkerchief, but he suddenly hid it behind his back. Favorite thing? The guy asked, smiling an open, slightly joking smile. Grandma's present ... Can I have it? Of course you can, he answered. Only in exchange for your name. My name's Olivia. Give me the handkerchief. That's a beautiful name. Why are you so scared? I won't eat your grandmother's gift after all. The stranger smiled, and Olivia felt so awkward that she was ready to turn around and leave the handkerchief and run out of the park. Seeing her confusion and embarrassment, the guy decided not to torture the girl any longer, spread the silk and gently lowered the handkerchief on Olivia's shoulders. I'm sorry if I scared you or hurt you. I didn't mean to, he admitted. I was just walking alone in the park. It's a holiday, springtime, everyone's happy, having fun, going on rides. I'm Kieran. The guy held out his hand to her, and Olivia instinctively offered hers. His palm was warm. Can I keep you company, or can you keep me company? I see you're out alone, too, Kieran said. No, I'm with a friend, Olivia said, pointing toward Mel, who was standing nearby. She saw Olivia waving her hand and walked over to her friend and the strange guy. Girls, let's have some ice cream. Kieran suggested it. My treat. The company headed towards the summer cafe. Kieran turned out to be very sociable, cheerful, and confident. After ordering ice cream for himself and the girls, he asked, Are you students? Yes, we study at the Teacher Training Institute, Mel answered, flipping her leg over her foot so that her already short skirt almost completely exposed her thigh. Kieran's gaze caught the lacy elastic of the stocking, and Olivia noticed it. Mel's doing her thing. She's going to start seducing Kieran, she thought. Olivia and Mel had been friends since freshman year. They were always together. Everyone around them wondered what could bind these two very different girls so tightly together. Mel was bright, even a little flashy. Long black hair flowing down her back almost to her waist. Fashionable clothes, chiseled figure with a narrow waist and lush breasts attracted the eyes of guys. And the girl knew her strengths and never missed a moment to use her feminine charms. Olivia was the opposite of her. She dressed modestly but tastefully. Her straw-colored hair was always braided or arranged in a bun at the back of her head. Her face was almost completely devoid of makeup, and her unremarkable, ordinary figure. Nothing made her stand out from the other students at the Pedagogical Institute. Mel was just suffocating, dying from the lack of male attention. I should have gone to law school, she complained. There are plenty of guys there, but in our group there are 2 nerds with glasses, and the rest are all girls. Did you see the competition for law school? Olivia asked her. 38 people per seat. You're retaking your history of literature exam for the third time, and you're still talking about law school. No, Mel, you would definitely fail the entrance exams for lawyers. Her friend understood this and only sighed, listening to the lectures without much interest. But she found a way to stay visible. At lunchtime, Mel went to the cafeteria of the neighboring building, where mostly boys studied. This way, she often managed to make new acquaintances and even short-term, non-committal romances. When Kieran told a little about himself and the girls learned that he was graduating from the military academy, Mel's interest in the guy grew exponentially. "What do the officers do for fun?" she asked Kieran. "Just like everyone else," the boy answered. "They go to the movies, meet and date girls, go for walks. I like to go to the skating rink in winter and sometimes play hockey with the guys." "For me, sports are a punishment," Mel said, her red lipstick on her chubby lips. "And movies are boring." "What do you do for fun?" Kieran asked. His question was directed at both girls, but he was looking at Olivia. The velvet gaze of his brown eyes made her a little embarrassed. And Mel rambled on. "I love parties. I went to one recently, invited by some guys from the physical education department. Music, wine, rock and roll. We had a great time." "Do you go out?" The question was directed at Olivia, but Mel didn't give her a chance to keep the conversation going. Nah, Olivia here prefers to read romance novels and cram for notes. I barely even got her out today. It's a crime on May holidays when everyone is out enjoying the warmth and spring sunshine, walking around with balloons and flags, having fun, to sit at home and read books. Stop it, Olivia tried to stop her, but Mel couldn't be deterred. "I also really like picnics," she said cheerfully. "How do you feel about going out, Kieran?" "I'm fine with it," he answered, not taking his eyes off Olivia. "Why not, if there's some meat marinated with spices, a bottle of red wine, and good company?" "It's decided. Let's go to the countryside together," Mel suggested. Olivia looked at her reproachfully. How could she impose on a guy she didn't know? But to her surprise, Kieran agreed very willingly. "Next Sunday we can go to the river," he said. "You owe us appetizers, we owe you meat and wine." "From who, you?" Olivia didn't understand. "You're the one who calls yourself you?" "No, of course not," the boy laughed. "It just occurred to me to bring a good friend of mine along." They finished their ice cream and walked around the park some more. Kieran asked for Olivia's phone number as he said goodbye to the girls at the exit. The girl took out a small notebook from her purse, wrote down her home number, and tearing out a sheet of paper, gave it to Kieran. "Where do you think you're going, girl?" Nicole asked Olivia as she watched her granddaughter pick up the cheese and sausage sandwiches and put them in a container. "Mel and I and the two boys are going to the river," Grandma Olivia said cheerfully. "We're going to grill kebabs and have fun." "I'm glad. It's high time you had a rest. You've been sitting at home like a recluse." Olivia threw on a light jacket over a white knit sweater, laced up her sneakers, and gave her grandmother a peck on the cheek. "Bye, Grandma. Don't miss me," she said. "Go with God, dear." The pensioner closed the door behind her granddaughter. Everything that was happening in Olivia's life worried her. Nicole had raised the girl alone since she was 5 years old. The woman's son and his wife had died, and she had gone completely gray overnight. It is not known how Nicole would have survived the death of her only son and his wife if she had not had a granddaughter in her arms. It was not easy, but she raised the girl in care and love. A former teacher of Russian language and literature, she was proud that Olivia followed in her footsteps and also decided to become a teacher. "When she graduates from college, she will go to work at the school and help me," Nicole thought, looking out the window as her granddaughter walked across the yard with a small leather backpack on her shoulder. Mel caught up with Olivia on the way. They were walking together to the bus stop where they were supposed to meet the guys. "Did you like Kieran?" Mel asked her friend. "Seems like a nice guy," she replied vaguely. "How complicated things are with you, Olivia," exclaimed the girl. "What do you mean good? I mean, do you like him as a man?" "I don't know. I like him a lot. Strong, handsome, sociable, and a military man. I wish I could marry him, and become a general's wife. Olivia laughed at her friend's so far-reaching plans. To become a general's wife, you must first marry a lieutenant. I don't remember where I heard this clever phrase. I don't mind. Kieran and his buddy were already waiting for them at the bus stop. They had backpacks and a collapsible barbecue in their hands. "Hi, girls," said Kieran. "Meet Adrian." "Mel." "Olivia." "Nice to meet you," Adrian smiled, looking at his girlfriends without embarrassment. "So are we going?" Kieran asked. The company headed towards the forest belt, beyond which the river flowed. The forest path was winding, leading deep into the forest, enticing the boys with the singing of birds and the sound of wind in the pine crowns. The place where the girls were led by the boys was very beautiful. The bank of the river, covered with young green grass, was strewn with dandelions. The rays of the sun were reflected in the water with shining sparkles, shimmering and rippling. The boys gathered wood from the forest and built a fire in a small brazier. The girls spread a blanket on the grass and laid out snacks. While Kieran put the meat on skewers, Adrian poured wine into plastic cups and served it to the girls. "Victory Day is coming up," he said. "I propose to drink to the military men who gave peace to our country." "Great toast," Kieran seconded, but not very polite. "Why is that?" Adrian didn't understand. "Because when there are girls in the company, the first toast is always to Mel ladies." Kieran looked meaningfully at Olivia. She seemed to him the heroine of a fairy tale. Her hair seemed golden in the bright sunlight, and her eyes were even more blue, like water in a river. "And we don't pretend to be superior at all, so I suggest we combine the two toasts and drink to the military women who helped the bravest and most courageous men to defeat the enemy." "What amazing ingenuity." Mel praised Adrian. The guys drank wine, chatted merrily, and enjoyed a pleasant conversation. The meat turned out very juicy and flavorful. The girls praised Kieran, who had prepared his own marinade for the kebab. "Yes, Kieran has many talents," Adrian said. "He is exceptional in general." "And what is his exclusivity?" Mel asked. "Tell me. We know almost nothing about him or you." "What can I tell you? He's a fine fellow. He'll make a model officer. Kieran is a man of his own principles, which I would not advise you to compromise." "What kind of principles?" Mel asked. "For example, he won't lend money on principle. It's true, girls, you can't ask him to die." I even took offense at him at first. What's wrong with helping a friend? And a friend could spend less money, instead of throwing it away left and right. Adrian smiled and rebuked Kieran for his wastefulness. "He also believes that marriages are made for great and pure love." "Isn't it?" Kira argued with his friend. "How can you create a strong family if you don't love a person?" "Come on," Adrian grumbled. "Love is pure chemistry. You meet someone, look into his eyes, and a chemical reaction takes place, and then..." "And what next?" Mel looked at the boy who spoke so boldly about love. "And then the brain shuts down, and uncontrollable things happen." Adrian rolled his eyes amusedly. "Euphoria engulfs two people who are drowning in each other's arms. And then children. Common life, constant lack of money, snot, diapers, work, pots and pans, laundry. In short, this is how what in our world is called family life begins." Everyone laughed merrily at the theatricality of Adrian's speech. He was generally good at joking, easily picking up on any topic, and was cheerful throughout the picnic. Kieran, on the other hand, seemed thoughtful. He was watching Olivia very closely. Noticing this, she began to feel uncomfortable. She stood up and walked toward the river, squatting down and touching the water with her hand. "Cold?" She heard Kieran's voice behind her. Olivia stood up and turned around. "Not really, but it's too early to swim." Kieran Adrian shouted, "Can't you swim across the river?" "What do you want to bet?" Kieran asked. "Easy." Adrian approached his friend. "Or can't you do it?" The boy started to take off his sweater and then his jeans. Kieran looked at Adrian, squinting his eyes. "I accept the challenge," he finally answered and began pulling off his clothes. "Guys, just kidding. That's enough." Olivia was worried. The water is so cold, you'll catch a cold. Come on, Olivia. The boys want to show who's braver and stronger. Let them fight for the victory. Mel stood next to her, excited for the exciting competition. What's the prize for the winner? Adrian asked. A kiss, of course. Without even thinking about it, the girl replied. Let's get this over with. Olivia was still trying to talk the boys out of this crazy idea. The river was small, but it was dangerous to stay in the cold water for long. Kieran, you seem like a sensible man. Please drop the argument. The guy came so close to her that she could hear him breathing. Olivia's heart sank. Don't be afraid of anything. I'll swim across, he said quietly and lightly touched the girl's cheek with his fingers. Olivia froze, feeling the color spill down her cheeks, but Kieran was already walking toward the water. He and Adrian jumped into the water and swam to the opposite shore. The girls froze in impatience, wondering when they would get there and not have to worry. At one point, Adrian pulled ahead, but Kieran quickly caught up with him and overtook him, and then his head disappeared beneath the surface of the water. Olivia gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. He drowned, Mel. No, it'll come out, trust me, she said, staring off into the distance, her hand over her eyes as she shielded her eyes from the glare of the sun. Where are you? Kieran, show yourself already. But Kieran was nowhere to be seen. The minutes dragged by slowly. It seemed like an eternity had passed when the boy's head appeared on the surface. He was 10 or 15 meters ahead of Adrian and reached the shore very quickly. Kieran stepped onto dry land and waved to the girls, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the few minutes it took for the boy to disappear under the water, they had become very nervous. Fool, Olivia said quietly. Cool. Shaking her head, Mel said. When Adrian also appeared on the opposite bank, the girls had already calmed down. They saw the friends shake hands and walk along the bank toward the automobile bridge. After about an hour, they returned to the picnic site. Olivia was packing her things, empty containers and dishes, into her backpack. Her whole demeanor showed that she was upset, hurt, and about to leave, but Kieran didn't seem to notice. Where's my prize? He asked cheerfully. I'm waiting for a kiss. Olivia saw Mel jump up to him, put her arms around his neck, and kissed him right on the lips. You're a real hero, said the girl enthusiastically. Olivia, aren't you going to kiss the winner? Kieran asked, but the girl only took her backpack in her hands and walked towards the forest. She decided to leave. Her head was a little dizzy from the wine she'd drunk, and she was beginning to ache from the experience. Olivia stepped out onto the path they'd taken to the shore and headed into the woods with a determined stride. She was angry at the guys who'd made her worry, at Milka, who could kiss a guy she didn't know so easily, at herself for being shy and timid. The girl didn't notice that she had stumbled and twisted her foot. A sharp pain made her crouch on the ground. Olivia felt her ankle, her hands touching it painfully. She tried to get up but immediately sat back down, groaning in pain and helplessness. She couldn't walk any further. Olivia realized she had gone too far to call for help. The boys wouldn't hear her voice in the thicket of centuries-old pines. Olivia cried. Why do I always have bad luck, she thought. The day had started out so well, and then the boys had gotten into this stupid contest and she was in such a bad mood. And now her leg. Olivia heard the crunch of twigs and turned around. Kieran was walking down the path. When he saw the girl, he ran up to her. Olivia, what's wrong? Why are you crying? I twisted my leg. It hurt, she complained, wiping her tears and sniffling her nose. Let me see, he said, lifted the pant leg on her ankle and touched it with his hand. Olivia froze as she felt his touch. It excited her. She jerked her foot away, startled by the sensation, and moaned again. I see, said Kieran. Can you stand up? He lifted her to her feet, then picked her up and carried her down the path in his arms. Kieran's strong arms cradled Olivia so tightly that she didn't even resist, trusting him. Kieran carried Olivia all the way to the house, and then lifted her, carrying her in his arms, to the 4th floor. Grandmother opened the door. Oh my God, what happened? She splayed her hands, clearing the passage. I twisted my leg, Grandma Olivia replied. Kieran walked into the room and sat her down on the couch. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Only now did Olivia realize how much strength it had taken for him to come all this way carrying her. "We should call an ambulance," Nicole said worriedly. "Don't," the boy stopped her. "Do you have a bandage?" It was in the medicine cabinet somewhere. Nicole opened the cupboard and pulled out the shoebox that held the medicine. A moment later, Kieran was applying a tight bandage to Olivia's ankle. "I'll fix the leg and you just keep it off for a few days and the pain will go away," he said, cutting the tip of the bandage. "Grandma, I forgot to introduce you." Olivia remembered that she hadn't even introduced her savior to her grandmother. "This is Kieran. We went on a picnic together." "I'm Nicole." Grandma smiled. "Why didn't you look after Olivia, Kieran?" The boy looked embarrassed but didn't lower his eyes, just looked at Olivia. "It's my own fault, Grandma," she said. "Now I'll stay at home all the holidays." A boiling kettle whistled longingly in the kitchen. "Young man, I'll ask you to move the table to the couch, and I'll bring everything to tea," Nicole said, nodding at the coffee table in the corner. "I'll make tea with strawberry jam for the hero and savior. Do you like strawberry jam?" "I love it," Kieran replied cheerfully. A few minutes later, they were having tea. Kieran could see how proud Nicole was of her granddaughter. She gladly pulled out an album and showed him Olivia's baby pictures, which embarrassed the girl. "Look, Kieran, how funny she is here with the huge bows," Grandma said, pointing her finger at the black and white picture. "I took her to the first grade, and here we went to the sea with her. And this is the graduation. Isn't she beautiful?" Kieran nodded, looking at the picture of a pretty girl with a braid over her shoulder. They chatted some more, and Kieran got ready to leave. "Can I come visit you sometime? To see how your leg is?" he asked Olivia. "Come, I'll be waiting," she said it so easily, so naturally, as if she and Kieran were old friends. Olivia wished he would come and see her. And when the grandmother slammed the door behind the boy and came back into the room, she found her granddaughter smiling. She was sitting with her legs stretched out and resting it on the stool Kieran had carefully placed before he left. In her hands was a teddy bear, once given to her by her parents. "Are you keeping a secret with your favorite teddy bear?" Nicole asked, smiling. "Don't you want to share it with me?" "With what?" "Like how and where did you meet this Kieran guy?" "In the park, Grandma. Why didn't you like him?" The girl was suddenly worried, afraid that her grandmother would find faults in Kieran. "Not at all," replied the pensioner. "Nice guy. Have a good time, baby." Nicole left the room, closing the door behind her. After a while, Olivia heard her humming something in the kitchen. Grandma always sang when she put the dough in, so it's going to be pies tonight, Olivia thought, closed her eyes, and fell into a happy, deep sleep. The next day she waited for a call from Kieran, but he didn't call. Busy, probably, Olivia thought. She spent the rest of the day reading. In the evening, Mel dropped by. As usual, brightly painted in a miniskirt and a blouse with a décolletage that showed off her ample breasts, she made the quiet atmosphere of the apartment noisy and cheerful. "It's your own fault," she reprimanded Olivia for leaving the picnic, twirling in front of the mirror. "If you'd stayed with us, none of this would have happened. Thank Kieran for finding you so quickly." "Yeah, he's good," Olivia said thoughtfully. Mel looked at her carefully. "Hey girlfriend, you're not in love, are you?" she asked with a sly squint of her eyes. "I didn't want to be in love with you," Olivia said, and I felt her cheeks reddening. "Kieran's a really nice guy, the kind of guy you could fall in love with. He brought me home, sat me right here, bandaged my leg." "Well, Adrian's just as good," Mel said with her arms at her sides. "He walked me home too and came to visit." "He was visiting you?" Olivia wondered. "Why?" "We still have some wine left." Mel plopped down on the couch with her friend and suddenly covered her face with her hands. "Olivia, we had everything with him. Everything, He left me just before morning." Olivia gawked at her friend. Mel, of course, was a flighty girl who did crazy things all the time, but to sleep with a guy they just met a few hours ago. Olivia couldn't get her head around that. "Did he confess his love to you?" she asked Mel. hoping that at least it wasn't just a fling under the influence of good mood and alcohol, but the beginning of a long and serious relationship. Are you two together now? I don't know. Mel took her hands away from her face and stared thoughtfully at the TV. I don't know. Mel removed her palms from her face and stared thoughtfully at the TV. Then why did you let him in? What's the big deal? You can't die from lack of male affection. As you know, it's a fish out of water. What cancer? What fish? What are you talking about? Olivia shrieked. If he slept with you, he must be serious. Yeah, you think Mishka from gym class had intentions too? And Kolka from law school? If all the guys I slept with married me, I'd be a sultaness with my own harem of men. Mel and Olivia laughed. Indeed, the boys were paying attention to the bright and cheerful Mel, and she was in no hurry to drive them away from her. But Adrian had more than caught Olivia's friend's eye. She really wanted to continue her relationship with him and maybe even get married. However, Adrian simply kissed Mel on the cheek and said bye without saying anything about a new meeting, but she hoped that he would call and ask her out on a date. Olivia and Nicole were going to spend Victory Day watching movies. There were a lot of old and new war movies on the program. They sat comfortably on the couch, teacups and cakes on the table in front of them. Olivia didn't feel like going outside, even though she and her grandmother went to watch the parade in the town square every year. And this time, Nicole was feeling healthy. I'd better stay home and watch the parade on TV, she said to Olivia. Do you think your Kieran is marching in the parade now? Why is he mine? Olivia was outraged. He hadn't even called in a week. Okay, she'll worry, call again, or come over, hello, here I am. Nicole smiled. Her girl seemed to really miss her new acquaintance. Olivia and her grandmother hadn't even had a cup of tea yet when the doorbell rang in their apartment. I'll get it, she said. Her leg wasn't aching anymore, and Olivia was able to get around the house just fine. She opened the door and was stunned. Kieran stood on the threshold. He was so handsome, and handsome in his military uniform, smiling so charmingly that Olivia couldn't hide her joy. Hey, he said. Happy holidays. Kieran handed Olivia the box of cake. She took it and stood there, smiling. Can I come in? Kieran asked, and Olivia snapped out of her stupor and led him into the hallway. Grandma, she shouted, we have guests. Come in, we're having tea, you're just in time. Nicole looked out of the room. Young man, you're on parade today. She gave him an approving glance. And then on parade, laughed the boy. We've been preparing for the festive march all week, and we haven't had time to visit you at all. We're not offended, the pensioner waved her hand, although someone here missed you very much. Bah, Olivia yanked her back. What a BA. Go to the kitchen. Get another cup and saucer for our wonderful guest. We'll celebrate Victory Day. Olivia's grandmother definitely liked Kieran. She suddenly sounded very tired and sent her granddaughter and her boyfriend out for a walk. I'll lie down for a while, rest in silence, and you go, there are people having fun. Artists probably perform. Kieran and Olivia walked around the city until late afternoon. They watched the performance of various amateur groups, went on rides in the park, and fed the ducks on the pond. The boy and girl did not even notice how it got dark outside, and citizens began to gather on the square to watch the fireworks. Olivia looked at the colorful scatterings with her head tilted back, and Kieran couldn't take his eyes off her delighted face. He mentally said, how beautiful you are, Olivia, and it turned out he'd said it out loud. Olivia looked from the night sky, lit up by the salutes, to Kieran. What did you say? She asked. I didn't quite hear it well. I love you, Kieran said, and kissed her on the lips. When she got home, Olivia was over the moon. Her grandmother was watching TV, but when her granddaughter appeared in the doorway, she turned it off by pressing a button on the remote control. Grandma Olivia rushed over to Nicole and hugged her. I'm so happy you can't even imagine. Why can't I? Yes, I can. You think I wasn't in love? Kieran told me he loved me. He's a good guy, he won't hurt you, said Grandma. Don't hurt him either. Appreciate what you have between you. It was a hot summer, with almost no rain at all. The residents of the city were suffering from the heat, escaping the scorching rays in the shade of trees, in parks near fountains, and on the river bank. The forecasters' predictions were disappointing. The heat would last for several more weeks. "Would you like some ice cream?" Kieran asked Olivia. "I can't eat it anymore." She looked at the boy with a pleading look. "Every day only ice cream saves me from this heat." "Do you want to go somewhere?" Kieran asked. "Like where?" Kieran had a vacation after graduating from the academy, and Olivia was on vacation. They were completely free and spent almost all their time together, dreaming about the future, making plans together. "If you want, we could go north," Kieran suggested, and Olivia couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. "To the polar bears," she laughed. "We can go to the south. We will swim in the sea and sunbathe on the beach under the southern sun," offered another option, beloved girl. Kieran, the words sun, tan, beach make my eye twitch. "Well, I'm sorry, but I just want somewhere to be with you, you know." So that there was no one else at all, he hugged and kissed the girl. "Come on, let's go to a campground. There is a great place outside the city. There are houses, forest, river." "It's a good idea," Olivia agreed, but she felt a sudden fear, a bad feeling, and clung tighter to Kieran. The next day, the two of them took an electric train out of town. The administrator of the camp met them at the gate. "I'll show you around," the young man said, inviting you to follow him. "I understand you booked a cabin away from everyone else, so I left you that apartment over there." He pointed toward the forest and led Olivia and Kieran to their cabin. It was small, surrounded by pine trees. There was one large room with a couch, a table, and a large bed. "Here is the tea station." The administrator showed a kettle and a box with tea bags. "You can use it. The canteen is open on schedule. You can buy drinks, pastries, some food from morning till evening in the cafeteria. After dinner, there is dancing on the grounds. Come along if you want to have fun. Oh yeah, linens are in the closet. Towels are there too. Make yourself comfortable, and if you need anything, call me." The young man left, remembering to close the door behind him. Olivia sighed, looking around. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "To walk, rest, and enjoy each other," Kieran answered. He wanted them to remember the weekend spent at the camping site, because he was going to say the most important words to his favorite girl. "I feel uneasy," Olivia said quietly. "Worried about Grandma? Thinking about how she's going to be alone without you?" "I don't know. Something just came up." "Well, I'll try to take your mind off your sad feelings," said Kieran. "The first item on our cultural program is a trip to the river." They spent the whole day walking through the woods, boating on the river, swimming in water as warm as milk. Olivia and Kieran even skipped lunch, eating the pies that the caring Nicole had put in her bag. When it got dark, the boy and the girl sat on a bench near their cabin, admiring the stars and kissing. Kieran hesitated to tell Olivia the important news, afraid that she would be upset. "Is something bothering you?" Olivia noticed her lover's condition. "Yeah, we're going to have to break up." The girl pulled back and looked into Kieran's eyes, and he realized he'd picked the wrong words. No, you misunderstood. I'm going on a business trip." "For how long?" Olivia asked. "I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year." The girl knew that there was a military conflict in one of the friendly countries, and that troops were being sent there to settle the unrest. But she had never thought that it would affect her and Kieran. "When?" Olivia asked, hoping that the moment of parting wouldn't come soon enough. "The day after tomorrow," the boy lowered his head. "If you only knew how hard it would be for me to leave you, I'd go crazy." Olivia put her palms to his face and looked into his eyes with a loving gaze full of concern, understanding, tenderness. "When I come back, you and I will get married. I promise you." "I love you very much," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, and then added, "Let's go." Olivia took Kieran's hand and led him into the house. She slowly undid the buttons of her dress and slid it to the floor, revealing a slender body in white lace lingerie. "Give me this night," Olivia said. "I'll be waiting for you, remembering every moment, every second." The lovers didn't sleep a wink until morning. They caressed each other again and again, plunging into the abyss of passion. 2 months had passed. Olivia stood in the bathroom mirror and looked at her face. Blue circles under her eyes, sunken cheeks, pale skin. She didn't look good. She moved her gaze to the sink, where a pregnancy test lay on the edge. 2 stripes were clearly visible against the white background. She was going to have a baby, a part of the person she loved. But Olivia was more worried than happy. Kieran hadn't sent a single letter, and she'd checked the mailbox several times each day. There were no phone calls, no messages either. Once, when she met Adrian, Kieran's friend, on the street, Olivia asked him if he had any news. But the guy shook his head, for some reason averting his gaze. The girl understood that in hot spots. There was no time to think about girls and love relationships, but it was possible to find a minute to scribble a couple of lines, "Everything is fine. I love you. I miss you." And now this pregnancy. Olivia thought about how to tell her grandmother so she wouldn't worry her too much. Nicole had been complaining more and more lately about her heart and high blood pressure. Olivia had called the ambulance again yesterday, and the doctors had insisted on hospitalization, but Grandma had flatly refused. "I will die at home, not in a government bed," she said, barely able to move her tongue, and signed her refusal with a weak hand. When she left for the institute, Olivia was always worried whether something had happened at home or how her grandmother was doing. The anxiety for her nearest and dearest people kept her from concentrating on the lectures. Mel was always trying to get Olivia to wake up. "Wake up, everyone's looking at you," she said as the entire audience stared at the girl, who had her eyes closed and was mumbling something under her breath. Olivia's friend sighed and shook her head. "You can't torture yourself like this." But there was no shadow of the old Olivia, the Olivia with whom they'd gone out in the evenings, shared secrets and made plans for the future. Olivia seemed petrified. "Olivia, what took you so long in the bathroom?" she heard Nicole's voice. "Breakfast is on the table. Hurry up or you'll be late for school." Olivia sat down at the table and reached for a sandwich. But when she felt a nasty lump in her throat, she put the piece of loaf with cheese and sausage back on the plate. After she drank her coffee, she kissed her grandmother and walked out the door. On the way to the institute, the girl met her friend. Mel stood near the entrance to the building and smoked a cigarette. When she saw Olivia, she waved at her. "There won't be a first class," Mel said. "The teacher's sick, so we can go shopping." She tossed the cigarette butt away and slung her bag over her shoulder. She noticed that Olivia was in no mood again. Mel understood that she missed Kieran, that she was in love, that she was in love, that she was waiting to hear from him, but she thought she shouldn't be so upset. "Nothing again?" she asked her friend. "No, there's other news though." "Well, what's the news?" Mel tugged on Olivia's arm. "I'm pregnant." The girl pulled a test out of her purse and showed it to her friend. "Shit, how could you do that?" Mel said, surprised and frustrated. "How?" Olivia didn't understand. "Careless, that's how." Mel handed the test back to Olivia and reached for the pack of cigarettes that was sticking out of the pocket of her bag. "Stop smoking," Mel, her friend, told her. "I just threw it out." "I'm allowed. I'm not pregnant. Thank God." "What are you going to do? You're not going to have a baby alone with no husband, no money, and no education, are you?" "I'm going to," Olivia said quietly. "You can't kill a child for lack of money and unfinished education. It wasn't his fault." "Oh, come on." Mel waved her off. "What baby? There's a little pea in there yet. Don't be a fool. I have a phone number of a good friend. She will arrange everything, but you'll have to pay. Do you have money?" Olivia was silent, absorbed in herself. She heard her friend's words, but they sounded distant, barely audible. "I said I had money to pay for the abortion." Mel shook Olivia's arm, trying to shake her out of her stupor. "I'm not having an abortion," Olivia said. "It's my and Kieran's baby. It has to be born." "You're an idiot," Mel exclaimed. "Where's your Kieran?" "No? And what makes you think he wants that baby? Did he ask you to bear him children? Or maybe he promised to marry you?" "Kieran will come back and everything will be fine. And I will give birth and wait with the baby for him." In the evening, Nicole and Olivia watched TV together. The girl thought about how to present the news so that her grandmother wouldn't get too excited, but she didn't even have to say anything. Nicole, who had raised her granddaughter since she was a little girl, knew her too well. "Are you thinking about how to tell me about the delay?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the TV screen. Olivia was silent. Her grandmother's foresight, her gift of sensing the state of her beloved granddaughter, always amazed the girl. "You're worried," Olivia, wondering what to do. How to move on, right? "Okay, Grandma. And it is possible not to think, but just to live. You should not try to rewrite your destiny. It is written long before the birth of any person by someone from above. You are doing a thankless job by racking your brains, doubting, thinking over every next step." "What should I do, Grandma?" Olivia suddenly put her head down on Nicole's shoulder, and Nicole put her arms around her and stroked her head. "Just to live," the pensioner replied calmly. "To live and enjoy every new day." "What do you think Kieran would say if he found out we were having a baby together?" Olivia asked, looking into Nina Petrovna's eyes. "I would say the same thing. You have to live and raise a child, love those who deserve it, and make each of their days better, happier." "I'm scared." "Don't worry, you'll give birth by the end of the course. You'll be with your baby all summer, and then I'll help you. I'll take care of the baby while you're at the institute. Then you'll get your diploma, and that's it." "What if Kieran doesn't accept the baby?" "Don't think about it. It's going to be okay." The new year was approaching. The streets of the city were covered with illuminations. A huge Christmas tree was put up in the center, shining with thousands of lights, and the counters of stores were bursting with New Year's goods clappers, sparklers, glittering balls, and soft toys. Olivia and Nicole pulled out a plastic Christmas tree and began to decorate it. "Your parents brought this tree back from vacation," my grandmother recalled. "Now it is no longer fashionable, but back then few people had such trees. Don't throw it away when I die. Let it be a memory." "Don't talk. She's going to die," Olivia said, half jokingly, half seriously. "Have you forgotten how you promised to help me with the baby?" "It's not like I'm going to die next year," Nicole laughed. The news was on the television. The announcer, in an elegant blue suit and tie, was saying something, but Olivia wasn't listening, only catching some of the phrases. Suddenly she shouted, "BA, turn up the sound," and she got off the stool she had climbed on to put a star on top of the tree. "More than 50 of our soldiers and officers are missing. Their fate is still unknown." In other news,
Grabbing the remote, Olivia began to press the buttons, switching channels, hoping to find a newscast somewhere else. But in vain. The end of a sentence the newscaster said made her uneasy. Apparently they were talking about the military sent to settle a localized conflict. Kieran could have been there. That explained why there were no letters or messages from the boy.
Olivia sat down on the couch, her heart racing. She reached for the table where the pitcher of water stood, but suddenly passed out. I'm awake. A man in a white coat leaned over Olga. "How do you feel?" "It's fine," Olivia said, trying to get up from the couch.
"You're lying down. You don't have to get up." The doctor returned her to the pillow with a gentle but insistent motion of his hand. "You're lying down." The doctor gently but insistently moved his hand back to her pillow.
"What's wrong with me?" "I understand that you were worried and fainted. There is no threat of abortion, but I would recommend that you lie down, rest, and don't be nervous. Don't watch TV. It's only bad for you." The doctor smiled. "Better listen to music." Which one? Olivia didn't understand.
"Anything that gives you pleasure. Turn around, we'll give you a shot. It's a sedative, don't worry."
The EMT and paramedic said goodbye to Olivia and Nicole, wished them health and a happy new year, and left. "You scared me." Girl grandma shook her head. She covered her with a blanket, turned on the wall lamp, and sat down in the armchair. "Grandmother, do you think he's missing too?" Olivia asked. "We don't know, Mel. Let's hope all is well. Your Kieran comes back." By the end of winter, Olivia was no longer hiding her position. Her belly was clearly protruding, growing larger with each passing week. She carried the pregnancy easily, successfully passing her classes and studying for exams. And when the baby kicked her for the first time with its little foot, she circled the significant day in her grandmother's wall calendar with a red felt-tip pen. There was still no word from Kieran.
Mel, can you ask Adrian to ask around about Kieran amongst his contacts? They went to school together, so maybe someone knows something? Olivia asked her friend.
Adrian who? Mel didn't immediately realize who her friend was talking about. Oh, that Adrian. I haven't seen him for a long time.
What? Aren't you two together? Olivia wondered. I thought.
What's there to think about? We slept together a few times, and then I got bored with him. He doesn't take me to a restaurant, he doesn't take me out, he doesn't have much money, he doesn't give me presents. I like it better with Vincent from journalism school. You know what kind of car he has? It's so hot. Mel continued to talk about her new lover, and Olivia wondered if she should go to the academy herself. Maybe they knew something about her lover. The next day she was already standing at the checkpoint. The officer on duty demanded a pass, which the girl, of course, did not have. Not without a pass, he kept saying the same thing when Olivia asked him to let her through. I need to know about one man, she begged. He was sent on a business trip, and I haven't heard from him in 6 months. I can't help you. If you get a pass, I'll let you in. But in the meantime, get out of here. You're not supposed to be here. Olivia turned and walked away, but the clerk suddenly called out to her. Girl, try to go to the military enlistment office. They should know about everyone who. Well, you know where. Thank you, Olivia thanked him, and she headed off to the enlistment office. As she got on the bus, she wondered why she hadn't thought of it before. Only the military could tell what happened to those who were sent on a business trip. And who will you be to him? The captain asked Olivia in the duty room through a window with an iron grill.
The girl is confused. She's basically nobody to him. A close acquaintance, you know. We only give information about military personnel to relatives. The captain looked at her with a cold stare. It seemed that even Olivine's pleading eyes couldn't break through that ice block.
The girl came out of the building. A woman was sobbing nearby, trying to comfort her, and a young man was standing nearby. Did something happen to you? Olivia asked. Should I call an ambulance? The guy looked at her, shook his head. No, I called a cab. It's coming, I'm taking my mom home. My brother died on a business trip in a hot spot. We just found out. Olivia's legs felt woozy. What if Kieran did too? She squeezed her eyes shut. No, not that. He was fine, she would feel it. She couldn't help but feel it.
Completely frustrated, Olivia returned home. Nicole was lying on the couch. A tonometer and several packets of pills on a stool next to her.
Grandma, what? Blood pressure. Olivia rushed to her grandmother. Yes, baby, Grandma said quietly. I've had some medicine. It'll make me feel better. I'll call the doctors.
Don't bother people, Nicole stopped her. It'll pass.
You tell me if it gets worse, okay? Said the girl. I'll tell you to go eat. There's soup on the stove and cutlets. Go on, Mel. Nicole closed her eyes. Olivia adjusted the blanket and went into the kitchen. She was really hungry. The girl heated up some soup, cut off a few slices of fresh bread. Having eaten quietly, she washed the dishes behind her. Trying not to make any noise, Olivia tiptoed into the room where her grandmother slept. With a glance at the old woman, she walked to her room and lay down. Tired from the long walk, Olivia fell into a deep sleep very quickly. When she opened her eyes, it was already dark outside the window. The girl got up, drew the curtains, and turned on the light in the room. Her grandmother must still be asleep because no sounds were heard. Olivia went into her room and called out. Bah, are you asleep? There was no answer.
Olivia moved closer to Nicole and took her hand. The palm was icy, lifeless.
Granny, wake up, Granny. The girl touched her cheeks, shoulders, shook her arm, but the old woman didn't show any signs of life. Olivia called an ambulance and the doctors diagnosed a heart attack. After the grandmother was taken to the morgue, The girl called a friend. "Mel, please come, please. Grandma's dead," she said quietly. In half an hour, Mel was already sitting next to her, hugging Olivia. She didn't cry, she just wanted someone to be there for her. And she had no one else but Mel and Kieran.
A month had passed since his grandmother's death. Olivia was coming home from the institute. From week to week, it was already time for her to give birth. The women's clinic even suggested that she go to the maternity hospital.
"You'll take vitamins, get drips, prepare your uterus for labor," the midwife told her. But Olivia refused. She needed to take as many credits as possible, close all her debts at the institute, and consult with her academic assistant about whether she should take a sabbatical or whether she could write and defend her diploma without a year's break. Thinking about all this, Olivia didn't notice when a beautiful blue foreign car pulled up next to her and a familiar male voice called her name. "Olivia, hi. Don't you recognize any old friends?" The girl slowed down and turned her head at the voice. Adrian jumped out of the car. He looked stunning: black suit, snow-white shirt, shined shoes. "Hi, Adrian. What a meeting." Olivia rejoiced. She hadn't seen Kieran's friend in a long time. The thought flashed through her mind that maybe he knew something about her lover. "What's up? How's life?" Adrian asked, hugging Olivia lightly around the shoulders. "I see you're doing well. When are you due?" "Soon enough." "Come on. I'll give you a ride," Adrian offered and pulled the girl by the arm. Olivia tried to refuse, saying it was good for her to walk, but Adrian was adamant. He opened the car door and gently placed Olivia in the front seat, then walked around to the driver's seat. "Shall we?" He was still as cheerful as the first time Olivia had seen Adrian. "How are you, Olivia?" Adrian asked, turning onto the avenue. "I know about your grandmother. My condolences." "Thank you. I'm fine. I'm going into labor any day now. The baby is kicking so much I can't take it anymore. And I can't wait to see him." Adrian smiled and nodded his head, looking at the road. "How are you doing?" Olivia asked him. "Working," the guy replied uncertainly. "Did I? I thought you were going to serve. I haven't seen you in a long time. I thought you'd been assigned somewhere." "That's what happened. They were going to send him to the Caucasus," Adrian replied. "My father got involved. He gave someone some money and put him to work for his old friend's company as head of security."
Do they pay well? Olivia didn't know why she'd asked that question, probably just to keep the conversation going.
"I'm fine. I have enough to live on," Adrian replied. "Here we are." The car stopped in the driveway. The guy looked at the girl, smiled. "Will you invite me for tea? Let's have a little chat." "Come on." "I don't really have anything for tea," Olivia said. "You don't have to." Adrian opened the door, helped Olivia out of the car, and with a click of the remote, locked the car doors. They reached the 4th floor and Olivia pulled her keys out of her purse. "How do you get up to the floor with a belly like that?" "It must be hard, isn't it?" Adrian asked. "And if you're carrying bags when you come from the store?" "I don't store much," Olivia said, smiling. "Why?" "I don't need much, and I don't have much money." "You can't get by on a scholarship, even if it's an extra one." She opened the door and invited Adrian in. The guy was visiting Olivia for the first time. He noticed that the girl didn't live very well. And where would the wealth come from? At least her grandmother used to get a pension every month, but now it's become difficult. Adrian walked around the apartment. The furniture was old, but well maintained. The wallpaper had not been reglued for a long time, and the television set. Such things were rarely found in the apartments of city dwellers. "I'll put the kettle on now," Olivia said. Pouring tea into cups, she asked Adrian, "Have you heard anything about Kieran?" The boy looked at Olivia carefully. Beautiful, even despite her huge belly, she looked at him, trying to hide her anxiety. She wasn't very good at it. "I didn't want to bring it up with you first, but I knew you would." Olivia sat on a stool, stirring her tea slowly with a spoon, her head bowed slightly. Her bangs fell over her eyes, and she fixed them with a light hand. Adrian had a hard time fighting the urge to run his hand through those straw-colored curls. He liked Olivia a lot.
Do you know anything about him? Olivia looked up at the boy.
Not specifically about him, Adrian replied. But they say that the whole company was killed.
Olivia covered her mouth with the palm of her hand to keep from shrieking.
This can't be. I believe in the best, too. After all, Kira and I were friends. I went to the military enlistment office. They said they don't give information to strangers. And there was a woman crying. Her son had been killed on that business trip. They don't disclose information so as not to worry people, Adrian said sadly, but rumors spread faster than television news. Can your father find out anything about Kieran through his own channels? Olivia dared to ask Adrian. She knew that his father was not the last man in town, had extensive, very useful connections.
I'll ask Olivia. I promise. Adrian finished his tea and got ready to leave. I gotta go. Business. Can I write down your phone number and you can keep mine? In case you need it.
Of course, Olivia said with hope in her voice. Maybe Adrian would know something and call her. They exchanged phone numbers and the guy left. Olivia sat down on the couch thinking. They were friends, but they were very different.
The next day, Olivia's phone rang. She was about to go to bed, having just gotten out of the shower.
I'm listening, she replied. Hi, it's Adrian. She heard the phone ring. Olivia's heart raced, wondering if he'd found out something about Kieran.
Yes, Adrian, go ahead. Are you still awake? Can I come in? I'm right here, at your doorstep.
Sure, come on up, Olivia said, and she hurried to throw on a robe over her nightgown. Adrian walked into the hallway carrying 2 huge bags and pulled them in front of the girl. Here, the humanitarian aid has reached you. Smiling happily, he said.
The boy took off his shoes and strode into the kitchen. Olivia watched in amazement as he put meat, sausage, cottage cheese, milk, candy, canned goods, several kinds of cheese, juices, tea, coffee. The groceries didn't fit on the table anymore, but he kept putting them out of the bags.
What is it, Adrian? The girl asked in surprise. I told you, humanitarian aid. After finishing the groceries, he sat down on a stool. I didn't ask. Why?
Olivia, I just wanted to help you and make you happy, Adrian said. His words sounded sincere, kind, and the smile stayed on his face. Olivia wanted to scold him at first to make him take it all back, but when she saw how pleased he was to do something for her, she melted. Well, let me at least give you some tea, she said, turning on the gas stove and filling the kettle with water.
Can we have coffee? Adrian asked. I have to be on duty with my men until morning today. The chief has come up with some kind of reinforcement, so we'll be waiting for the enemies until morning.
What enemies? Olivia didn't understand. She was even a little worried. I'm just kidding, the boy said. They just asked me to be on duty until morning.
They drank tea and talked, but Olivia waited for Adrian to find out something about Kieran and tell her. Finally, when she couldn't bear it, she asked him directly. The boy grew sad for a moment. He seemed to be struggling to find his words.
You don't have to wait for Kieran anymore, Olivia, he said finally. No one has any other information. It's all confirmed.
What was confirmed? Olivia didn't want to believe the worst thing that could happen to her lover. Kieran is gone. In one ravine, our military found more than 20 decapitated bodies, officially recognized as the bodies of dead men from Kieran's company. I'm sorry.
Olivia covered her face with her hands, crying bitterly. Adrian stood up, walked over to her, and put his arm around her shoulders. Suddenly she cried out, and clutched her stomach. Oh, Mummy. It hurts, Olivia moaned. Oh, I think I'm in labor. I'll call an ambulance. Adrian frantically searched for his phone. No, I'd rather drive myself. It would be quicker that way. He helped the girl get dressed and went down to the car, calming her down, saying some ridiculous words that everything would be fine soon, at the same time cursing at the careless drivers who were obstructing the traffic. Adrian pressed the gas pedal. Soon the car entered the courtyard of the maternity hospital and slowed down at the steps. The boy jumped out, opened the door to help Olivia, and gently led her into the waiting room.
"Anybody there?" he shouted. "There's a girl in labor here." On a sunny April morning, Olivia sat in a hospital bed holding her baby boy. The baby had been born strong and healthy. Black hairs tousled on his head, just like Daddy Olivia thought as she stroked her son, holding him to her chest. Her heart was full of love for this little man, the most dear to her in the world. The door to the room opened and a nurse came in. She was holding a huge bouquet of roses in a bag. "Pravushina, Olivia, there's a message for you," said an old woman. "Look at the flowers they're carrying for moms now, 100 of them in a bouquet." In the past, fathers would come to the window, pick daisies and dandelions from the flower beds, and their grandmothers would rejoice, as if they had brought flowers. They loved them. Nanechka laughed, put the bouquet on the nightstand, and put the bag on her neighbor's nightstand.
"Who's it from?" Olivia asked.
A representative, in a suit, said that the note was in the bouquet, but he went under the windows, it seems, said the nurse.
Olivia put the baby in the cuvette and herself took a small card out of the bouquet of roses. "Congratulations on your son." Look out the window, she read the message, written in beautiful, even handwriting. Adjusting the robe across her chest, Olivia walked over to the windowsill. A smiling Adrian was standing below. When he saw the girl, he waved his arms. The guy shouted something, but Olivia could hardly hear anything. The windows in the ward were closed. Then Adrian ran to the car and opened the trunk. From there, he pulled out a luxurious, very expensive baby stroller, blue in color. But
Olivia watched in amazement as he showed her the different positions: a stroller for stroller sleep, a car cradle, a carrier, and this is how you can carry a baby when they're already sitting up. Suddenly, Adrian slipped his hand into his pocket and showed Olivia his cell phone. He dialed her number, and the room resounded with the sound of an incoming call. "Why did you spend so much money?" Olivia asked with a laugh. "It's a very expensive stroller. I wouldn't spare anything for your baby. He'll ride like a real king."
"Thank you so much," Olivia thanked him. "For what?"
"For everything." Adrian looked at her and was silent. Skinny, pale after childbirth, in her hospital gown, she was so touching, so real, so tender, so desirable. "I'm right here. Call me if you need me," he said calmly, emotionless. And then he was gone. Adrian waved to Olivia, got in his car, and drove out of the hospital yard. The girl looked thoughtfully at the car as it drove away. "I wonder why things didn't work out with Mel. Adrian is so caring and open." She remembered her friend and decided to call her and tell her the news. Anticipating how happy Mel would be to hear that Olivia had given birth, how she would start asking questions, she dialed her friend's number. No one answered for a long time, and then she heard some unintelligible sounds. Olivia thought something was wrong with the connection and decided to call later.
On the day of discharge from the maternity hospital, Olivia and the baby were met by Adrian. Over the next few days, the young mum hadn't been able to reach Mel. At first, she was a little worried about why her friend didn't contact her, but then she decided that Mel had found a boyfriend again and was head over heels in a relationship. So she couldn't be bothered with Olivia. It wasn't just Olivia who was having a party. As soon as they heard the music, women in labour and other wards of the hospital leaned against the windows. In the courtyard of the hospital, the musicians were ready to play a touching song on command. Fountains of balloons and fresh flowers were set up around the hospital.
"What a celebration yours made for your discharge." The midwife shook her head approvingly. "A caring father, there aren't many like him nowadays. Most of them come drunk or, at best, hungover." Olivia didn't bother to reassure the doctor that it wasn't the baby's father. Why would she? It was a complete stranger, and she didn't need to know the details of the patient's personal life. For a moment, she thought about Kieran. Why fate was so cruel and he died without even recognizing that he had a son. It was a pity for Olivia, and that the grandmother wouldn't get to see her great-grandson.
"Look, are all the body parts in place?" jokingly asked the midwife, undressing the boy. Here are the hands, here are the hands, here are the feet. There are 5 fingers everywhere. Look at him, he is smiling. He understands that he will go home with Mummy and Daddy.
The woman began to dress the newborn, and when she finished tying a beautiful bow on the envelope, she said, "Hold your happiness tight. Grow up healthy and come back for your second."
Olivia thanked the midwife, and they walked out onto the porch of the birthing center together.
At that moment, music came on and a handsome male baritone began to play. The love song moved Olivia so much that she even wept. Adrian walked over and embraced the baby. The staff was in tears at the touching scene, which was watched by the entire maternity ward. When the music finished, dozens of colorful balloons soared into the sky. "What did you name him?" Adrian asked, examining the boy by lifting the edge of the envelope. "Taylor," Olivia answered. "Taylor Swan." Adrian looked at her. At that moment, there was so much happiness and tenderness on Olivia's face that he couldn't resist hugging her. The driver with his camera jumped up in time to take a wonderful picture.
Olivia hadn't been able to reach Mel because she'd been out. She was in the hospital, the same hospital where Olivia had given birth, but 1 floor up, in the pathology department. "What's going on outside?" she asked her roommate when she heard the music. Mel couldn't get up and walk to the window. She had just been given an IV.
"Some of the young mothers are met by a happy and loving daddy," replied a neighbor in the ward, who was sitting on the windowsill and watching what was happening in the yard. "What, with an orchestra?" Mel wondered.
Hey, musicians, balloons, flowers. A happy woman who has such a husband. He'll probably carry her in his arms and give her child the best," she sighed, stroking her bulging belly.
Where do men like that come from, Mel thought, thinking that Adrian would never do such a thing. All he wanted to do was dive into bed with her, enjoy himself like a young stallion, and not care what happened afterward. Mel didn't dare to tell Adrian that she was pregnant for a long time. She had relationships with different guys, but she always took care that there were no surprises and took birth control pills. But apparently she somehow managed to skip taking the pills, and one day a pregnancy test gave her a positive result. Damn it. She threw the test in the trash can in frustration. We have to solve this problem right away. She dialed the number of her friend who could help and arrange an abortion, but she didn't answer. Mel decided she would call later. Toward evening, Adrian called to say that he would be coming to see her tonight. He entered the hallway at 8 o'clock sharp. Mel's small apartment was instantly fragrant with the scent of expensive, refined perfume.
"Did you miss me, my little hen?" Adrian grabbed the girl by the waist and pulled her tightly against him. "Missed you, of course," she said, smiling. "You don't come so often lately. You've forgotten all about me." "You'll forget you." The boy dragged her to bed, tearing off Mel's silk robe and underwear as he went.
Throwing her on the bed, he unzipped his pants. "Take off your clothes properly," Mel said, panting with excitement and passion, but Adrian was on top of her, growling like a wild animal and roughly overpowering her again and again. When he shuddered and groaned and collapsed, pressing her into the soft, springy mattress, she whispered.
Why so rude? A tear rolled down Mel's cheek. She was hurt that Adrian had acted like a street whore, like he'd raped her.
He rolled over onto his back, adjusted his pillow, and said quietly, "I'm sorry, something came up. Give me a cigarette." Mel reached for the pack.
"Are you in trouble?" she asked. The girl had already gotten to know Adrian's character very well. Sometimes he was rude to her, but more often he came to relax in her arms and complain about his unloved job, his failed military career, his overbearing father who decided everything for him.
"No," Adrian replied. "It's fine." "I have something to tell you." Mel decided to tell Adrian that she was pregnant. There was a faint hope in her soul that the guy would want a child and marry her, or at least that they would raise the baby together. She agreed to it even without a wedding, without a stamp in her passport. Adrian took a drag on his cigarette and released a cloud of blue smoke from his mouth.
"I just found out today, I'm pregnant." "Well done, you've created a problem for yourself. Now you'll solve it," the guy said indifferently.
"You got me pregnant." Mel rolled over onto her stomach and looked into his eyes.
Adrian was quiet for a moment, finished and put the cigarette out on the ashtray, then stood up and pulled on his pants.
"Mel, I'm not a child and neither are you," he said, and the girl felt the metallic tones in his voice. "You and I both know what we have in common. I never promised you anything, and I certainly never dreamed of having children with you." "Adrian, but it happened. I didn't do it on purpose." She got it the guy was buttoning his shirt. "And how do you know it's me who got it, and not the other men you've been screwing around with?"
Adrian, how can you do this?
"Why? You think it's a secret to me that it's not just me you're spreading your legs in this bed? You're a whore, Mel. You're just a painted, brainless whore. You think anyone would want to have children with you? I can't even imagine you as a mother. What can you give your children?"
I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I just wanted to tell you the news, because we have to decide what to do together. Mel got up from the bed and put her arm around Adrian's shoulders. I'm not forcing myself or this baby on you. I'll have an abortion and that's it. Just don't leave me. Adrian pushed her away, pulled several large bills out of his wallet and tossed them on the nightstand.
"There should be enough here," he said, and walked out of the bedroom. A second later, Mel heard the door slam shut in the hallway. What an asshole, she thought, picked up her phone and dialed the number of the grocery delivery phone.
"Hello, I'll have a pizza and a bottle of whiskey. Write down the address."
Adrian brought Olivia and the baby home. A security guard followed them up to the 4th floor of the girl's apartment, carrying heavy bags. Olivia was completely immersed in her thoughts. Even though she was happy, she had a lot of problems to solve: paperwork for her allowance, a call to the pediatric clinic, and a graduation coming up. "Is she asleep?" Adrian asked as Olivia entered the kitchen. He was taking groceries out of the bags and putting them in the refrigerator. "I've got a lot of stuff here, so I figured I'd have enough for a while, and then I'd bring you whatever you want. I also bought some baby stuff. I didn't know what I'd need." Olivia glanced at the bags of diapers, onesies, bottles. "Thank you. You're a big help." "It's because I love you, ... and your baby," Adrian said softly. The girl looked up at him. It seemed to her that Adrian was different now, different from before. Serious or something. "Olivia, trust me, it's going to be hard for you to raise a baby on your own. And I'll do anything for you. I've liked you since the first time I met you at the bus stop when we went on that picnic. But I couldn't tell you then. You realize. Adrian, you're kind, caring, sweet. I don't know what I'd do without you. But you know I don't love you."
"It doesn't matter, as long as I love you. You'll never, ever regret believing me. I'm begging you, let's get married. I'll be a good father to Taylor." His father, as Kieran Olivia looked out the window and watched the children playing in the yard. Taylor would grow up to build sand towers in the sandbox.
It's sad and painful, but Kieran will never see his son. I can keep his memory alive, always telling Taylor what a hero his father is. And maybe you and I can still give Taylor a little brother or sister.
Feeling him come up behind her and touch her shoulder, Olivia turned, looking intently into Adrian's eyes.
"What about Mel?" the girl asked. "What will she say when she finds out?" Mel and I had never had anything serious, just meetings for fun. Neither she nor I ever loved each other. And anyway, Mel wasn't made to be a wife and mother, and you're different. A baby cried from the room. Olivia hurried to the baby, and Adrian sat down at the table and thought. It seemed to him that Olivia was about to agree to his proposal. They got married. They decided not to have a wedding or a big party, which upset Adrian's parents very much. But he was firm in his decision. "We have a young son. No time for weddings," Adrian said as he cut off to his parents. For a year, they'd been adjusting to each other. Adrian went out of his way to do everything for Olivia and Taylor. He bought expensive gifts and jewelry for his wife and toys for Taylor. Olivia saw her husband's efforts and was grateful, but every day she noticed more and more how much Taylor looked like Kieran. He had the same eyes, hair, even a smile. The girl never forgot her lover. Adrian saw it all, felt it all, and hoped that time would heal the wound and cover with the dust of oblivion the memories of his wife about Taylor's father. Olivia was walking with her son in the park one day. Taylor sat in his stroller, gazing around. He had a cookie in his hand. Olivia rolled the stroller down the alley. The girl came to this park often. There was no traffic noise, birds were singing, and she could always talk to other moms, just like her, walking with strollers. Suddenly, a tall, slender girl caught her attention. She staggered down the alley, sometimes falling, struggling to get up and walking again. Olivia quickened her pace a little. "Young lady, are you ill?" she shouted, approaching the stranger. And she collapsed back onto the paving stones, leaned on her arm and tried to get up. "Come on, I'll help you." Olivia held out her hand to the girl, and when she looked up, she recognized the stranger as her old friend. "Mel, what's the matter with you?" Olivia exclaimed in surprise. She helped her friend up, sat her down on a bench, and rolled the stroller with Taylor closer. Her friend was drunk. Her hair was strewn over her shoulders. Her clothes were dirty, and an arrow was crawling down her leg in black capron stockings. Mel recognized Olivia, looking at her with a hazy stare that reeked of alcohol. "You look good." "Thank you, Mel," Olivia said. "Why are you here like that? What happened to you?" "And a lot of things happened to me." Mel burst into a coarse, drunken laughter. "And you, and your Kieran, and my Adrian. A lot has happened to all of us." "What do you mean?" Olivia didn't understand. "Mel, are you sick? Do you need help?" "Help?" The girl opened her purse and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. She turned to Olivia and squinted her eyes. "You're the one who needs help, living in a fog and not noticing anything around you." "What are you talking about? Wake up, Mel, we were friends." "And I'm not friends with traitors. You betrayed everyone, me, Kieran. You know how bad I felt when you started living with Adrian. And you know how bad Kieran felt when you wouldn't even let him look at his son." "What the hell are you talking about?" Olivia didn't understand what her former friend was trying to accuse her of. "Do you have any money?" Mel asked her suddenly. "There's a card," replied Olivia. "Let's go." Mel struggled to get up from the bench and walk down the alley. Olivia followed her, rolling the stroller with her son in front of her, not wanting to let her go until she explained everything and told her about herself. They reached the nearest supermarket. "Give me the money," Mel said. Olivia handed her a bank card. Her friend entered the store and came out a short time later holding a bottle of alcohol. Soon they were sitting in the kitchen of Mel's apartment. Olivia was amazed at how messy the rooms were. There were things scattered everywhere, bottles, dirty dishes in the sink, and an ashtray full of cigarette butts on the windowsill. Mel took a glass and poured herself from the bottle. "I'm not offering you one. I know you won't," she muttered and raised her glass. "Cheers." "How did you come to this, Mel?" "Rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled. And you helped me ruin my life with Adrian. He told me you didn't have anything." Olivia tried to justify herself. "Well, of course, there's nothing but 2 kids." "What kids?" Olivia thought Mel had gotten drunk and was talking nonsense. But her friend got up from her chair and shuffled to her room, her torn tights shuffling across the floor. When she returned, she placed a photograph in front of Olivia. It showed 2 babies. They looked no more than 3 or 4 months old. "This is Ciara and Vincent. And their father Adrian," pointing her finger at the picture. Mel said, "My children, the twins." Olivia looked at the faces of the babies in surprise. They were lying on the beautiful blanket next to each other, looking exactly alike. "You had a baby with Adrian? When?" Olivia exclaimed in bewilderment. "Only 6 months ago. And that asshole didn't recognize the kids. And I had my parental rights revoked. With his connections, he made a quick deal and put the kids in an orphanage." Everything she'd heard from Mel seemed unbelievably crazy to Olivia. Adrian couldn't do that. Yes, he had connections, he could do a lot of things, but putting his children in an orphanage. "And then he wanted to kill me. He got me drunk and tried to strangle me, but Kieran wouldn't let him. He hit him so hard." Mel laughed, her laughter sounding unnatural, theatrical. "Kieran who? What are you talking about?" "I don't understand anything. Olivia said, and stop drinking. She took the glass from her friend, catching an angry look. Your Kieran punched him. Adrian was choking me and he punched him in the face. Mel, wake up. Kieran died on a military trip. No, he didn't. And he saw you. Where? I beg you, pull yourself together and tell me everything in detail. It turned out that Kieran was back, and the first thing he did was to stop by his friend's house. As he approached the driveway, he saw Olivia and Adrian come out of the door. The guy had a small child in his arms. They smiled at each other, talked about something, and then got into the car and drove away. A few days later, Kieran decided to find out about Olivia and Adrian from Mel. He went to her house, knocked on the door, but no one opened it. In his heart, the guy banged on the door. It was unlocked. Entering, he heard the sounds of a struggle, ran into the bedroom where Adrian was choking Mel. Kieran punched him and pulled him away from the gasping girl. Ah, he's back. Adrian, recognizing his old friend at once, said, "Hero, now you're going to get your rights, but your Olivia is no longer yours. She's my wife and we have a son growing up." Adrian pulled his passport out of his pocket and took out the picture that had been taken when he was discharged from the hospital. Olivia was smiling from the photo, and the boy was holding a newborn baby in his arms. As she listened to her friend's story, Olivia could hardly believe what was happening. It turned out that Kieran was not dead, as Adrian had told her. He was alive and knew nothing about his little son. "Give me a glass," Mel asked quietly, calming down. "I need a drink." Olivia moved the glass, watched silently as her friend poured the liquor into it, and then asked,
Why didn't you tell me?
"Don't you understand? I hated you with all my soul. Where's Kieran now?" "He's probably gone. Who knows where he is?" Mel waved her hand uncertainly.
Why didn't he come to me, but went to Adrian first? He didn't mention it.
Nope, the girl shook her head, pouring herself another. "I understand him, though. He's so handsome, proud, strong, and he'll come to you one-armed." "What do you mean, one-armed?" Olivia didn't understand anything at all. Everything Mel was telling her could have been the plot of a stupid show, like so many shows on TV nowadays, but it couldn't have happened in real life. "And his arm was torn off on a business trip," Mel said, collapsed her head on the table and snored. The girl fell into a dead, drunken sleep. Returning home, Olivia wondered how to go on with her life. On the one hand, she has a strong family, a caring husband, a favorite son. On the other hand, Kieran, as it turned out, is alive, and he thinks that Olivia left him, preferring to live with Adrian. She was hurt that he hadn't made himself known, hadn't come to see her, but had appeared in front of Mel and a former friend. All day, thinking about how to live on, she decided that she would not change anything in her life. But Mila should be helped. 3 years had passed. Olivia and Adrian lived in a spacious apartment and raised Taylor together. The baby was growing up to be a very bright, active boy, constantly demanding attention. Olivia spent the whole day dealing with her son, and in the evening waited for her husband from work. Sometimes, looking out the window as he drove up to the entrance and parked the car in the yard, she thought that more caring than Adrian husband could not find. He spent all his free time with his wife and son, and last year they flew to Italy together. The doctors said it was good for the boy to breathe the healing air. For his 3rd birthday, Adrian gave Taylor a huge battery-powered car. The boy wasn't very good with the car, but he squealed with delight when his dad helped him steer it and race it down the long hallway. The whole family gathered to celebrate Taylor's birthday. Adrian's parents treated Olivia and her son calmly, not complaining, but every chance they got they had the pleasure of reminding her that she was an orphan and a dependent. Olivia didn't like it, and Adrian just waved it off, saying, "Never mind." Her husband's older sister often reproached Olivia for running around with her son like a piece of paper, and Adriana still hadn't given birth. As she set the table for the party, Olivia thought she would have to endure the reproaches, taunts, and sarcastic phrases directed at her again. Lately, she'd noticed more and more that Adrian himself was bringing up topics that insulted and offended his wife. Why he did so, she did not understand. When they were alone, more caring and affectionate Adrian could not imagine anyone. but in the presence of people who were strangers to Olivia, he always found something to pick on. And this time he was out of line. Olivia's taunts amused her in-laws. Everyone at the table seemed to be having fun except her. "Adrian, stop it. I feel bad." Olivia tried to stop her husband. But he went on. Then the girl could not stand it. Trying to appear calm, she smiled and said softly but very clearly, "The other day I went to the orphanage where your children live, honey. I looked at them, brought gifts and toys. You know, they're so cute. Why don't we take them for the weekend? The principal said it's possible." Adrian put his fork on the table silently, then slapped Olivia, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her out of the room. The family stared at them, uncomprehending. "You've scraped it all together, daughter-in-law, on your own head," said the mother-in-law sneeringly. The guests continued to eat as if nothing had happened, placing appetizers and salads on their plates. "Mom, what kids did Olivia say Olivia was talking about?" Sister Adrian suddenly asked. "Who knows who she is? She's got some nonsense in her head, so she's just saying whatever she wants. Andriusha only has Taylor." In the kitchen, Olivia wheezed, trying to free herself from her husband's strong, clinging fingers, which squeezed her neck. Adrian pinned her against the refrigerator and hissed, trying to keep his voice low so the family wouldn't hear. "Who do you think you are? You think you can tell my parents and sister whatever you want? Let go or I'll scream. I know all about you and Mel, about how you put your own children in an orphanage and stripped her of her maternal rights, about how you've been lying to me all these years." "Shut up. Have you forgotten the swamp and poverty I pulled you out of? What would you be blaming your bastard for if it wasn't for me? My son is not a degenerate. He has a father and he's alive. That's something to remember. You should be grateful to me for the rest of your life. You've been living like a cheese and butter. Let go or I'll tell your parents." Adrian looked into her eyes with anger. He loosened his grip and finally let go of Olivia. She sat on the stool, rubbing her neck where her husband's fingers had left marks. "How could you? You acted like a monster." "It's none of your business. Mel's a whore. I never loved her. And the fact that I gave birth to her is something you have to prove." Already, Olivia said quietly. "What?" Adrian didn't understand what his wife meant. "It's already been proven. Mel and I ordered a paternity test. Vincent and Ciara are your children. They're your blood twins. What kind of monster are you to throw your own babies out of your life? How could you deprive them of their mother? People like Mel can't be normal mothers. She's a slut and an alcoholic." "What are you talking about? Didn't you do everything you could to make her drink? Didn't you want to kill her? Kieran's a witness. He'll testify that you strangled my friend to get rid of her." "You can't prove anything." Suddenly, Adrian's eyes were aflame. No one would believe a degenerate alcoholic who'd been deprived of her parental rights.
You're wrong. Mel has been in treatment and hasn't been drinking alcohol for a long time. Olivia said triumphantly. She and I are almost finished with all the necessary paperwork. Soon she'll have her children back and she'll be happy. And I'm leaving you right now. I've had enough.
Stop. Adrian grabbed her hand and gripped the girl's wrist tightly with his fingers. "Do you still want your relatives to know?" Olivia looked boldly into his eyes, determined to tell her parents-in-law what their favorite son was really like. The guy let go of her hand, lowered his head. "Go away and never come into my life again," was all he said. On a May morning, Olivia and Mel were picking up the children from the orphanage. Vincent and Ciara were all dressed up. Mel had bought them nice suits and shoes, and she was getting excited. The day before, she and Olivia had cleaned up the apartment, setting up the nursery in Mel's former bedroom. Now there was a bunk bed, a closet full of children's things, and a large basket of toys. Mila had a very difficult time. When she learned what had happened in her life, Olivia began to visit her friend whenever she could get away from home. When she went for a walk with her son, she bought food to feed Milka, but she kept demanding alcohol. But long conversations, convincing her that only by stopping drinking, she could get her children back, did the trick. Mel agreed to treatment. For 2 months she was in a private specialized institution, where Olivia paid for her treatment. When Mel was discharged, she didn't look like the cheerful, mischievous, flighty girl her friend had known her to be. Something was broken inside her. She kept thinking about the children, berating herself for the mistake she'd made in her life by letting Adrian send them to an orphanage. Olivia, on the other hand, convinced her every time that everything could still be brought back. She did everything she could to get Mel the twins. And so today they would settle into this room with new baby wallpaper and a big fluffy rug on the floor. Looking around the room, pleased that everything was working out so well, Mel said, "Thank you, Olivia, and I'm sorry if I hurt you in any way." "Don't thank me, we're friends." "It'll be okay," Olivia hugged her friend, who had recently been ready to fall into the abyss, to lose the most important thing in a mother's life, her children. "Mommy, will they let me play with toys?" Olivia asked Taylor. The girls laughed. "Of course they will," they replied almost in unison.
"Well, shall we go?" Mel said. "We have to pick up some more cake and brownies."
Mel was happy that in just a few hours her apartment would be filled with children's laughter and happiness.
Walking home from Mel's, Olivia held Taylor's hand. They walked down the park alley that led to Olivia's house. The girl wondered how life might have turned out if she hadn't met Kieran in that park one day. Yes, she had been through a lot, but looking at the boy walking beside her, holding her hand tightly, Olivia was happy.
"What do you think of Ciara and Vincent?" she asked Taylor. "Good ones. Why were they living in an orphanage? They have a mom, Aunt Mel." "It happens," Kid Olivia answered uncertainly. Taylor was a bright boy and understood a lot of things, but she thought it was hard to explain to a child why children were abandoned by their parents. When he grew up, he'd understand. After Olivia packed her bags and left Adrian on her son's birthday, his relatives repeatedly called her and threatened to take Taylor away. Her husband never dared to admit to his parents that Taylor wasn't his son. Well, then Olivia had to tell them herself. Tired of listening to the threats, she did just that. "Taylor is not Adrian's son or your grandson," she told her mother-in-law. "So leave us alone and don't call again." Adrian's mother yelled something else into the phone, that she would sue, take a DNA test, take the baby away from Olivia, but she just hung up. Olivia wanted nothing more to do with those people. Tomorrow she would take Vanya to Mila's. Her friend promised to stay with him for a couple of hours while Olivia was at the interview. The girl was going to get a job at the gymnasium. If everything went as Olivia planned, Taylor, as a child of an education worker, would be given a place in kindergarten. Life was getting better. As she thought about it, Olivia walked leisurely down the alley, holding her son's hand. Taylor snatched his hand out of hers and ran down the path. "Taylor, where are you going?" Olivia shouted after her. But the boy ran and ran. He saw a beautiful butterfly and rushed after it. Suddenly the child stumbled and fell with all his might on the paving stone path. Olivia rushed to her son's aid. She saw a strange man come to the child, lift him up and put him on his feet. "Son, you're all right," she ran over to the boy and squatted down to examine the wound on his knee, which was visible through his torn pants. "How could it be? How many times have I told you not to run?" She suddenly realized that a man had helped the boy up and thanked him without even looking in his direction. "Thank you so much for helping my son." "You're welcome, because that's my son too. How you doing, fighter?" Olivia slowly raised her eyes to the stranger who had come to her child's rescue. Her heart was pounding frantically. She stood up, not taking her eyes off his face. Kieran looked at her with the same kind, loving velvet eyes. "Hello, Olivia," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for you here for a long time." Kieran ... Love. Olivia couldn't believe her eyes. Taylor's father was standing in front of her, the man she loved most in her life. "I thought I'd never see you again. I thought you'd never come back." "How could I not come back? I promised you, remember? I promised you there, at the campground, surrounded by centuries-old pines, in our cabin, where we loved each other so much." "I remember everything, and I never forgot," Olivia said quietly. "Let's go home." The three of them walked down the park alley toward the exit. Kieran held his son with one hand. But Olivia didn't care that her boy's father had come back crippled. The important thing was that now they would always be together.